There's an island off the coast of Brazil where the ground moves beneath your feet, where every branch you reach for might strike back, where the trees themselves seem to pulse with a quiet, patient menace that has kept human beings at bay for longer than anyone alive can remember. It is a place that does not invite you, it does not welcome you, it does not care about you, and yet, for reasons that say far more about us than about the island itself, we cannot stop thinking about it. We cannot stop wanting to understand it. We cannot stop asking the question that the island has already answered over and over again for 11,000 years. The question is simple: can we go there? And the answer, delivered not in words but in venom, in silence, in the slow grinding patience of evolutionary time, is equally simple. No, you cannot, not really, not safely, not without consequences that ripple outward in ways you cannot predict and cannot control. This is the story of Ilha de Queimada Grande. You know it by another name. You know it as Snake Island. And everything you think you know about it is only the beginning. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this documentary and what time you are watching it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Now let us begin, not with the snakes, because that is what everyone expects, and the island does not care about your expectations. Let us begin instead with the water. Let us begin with the Atlantic Ocean, that vast and restless body of salt water that has shaped continents, swallowed civilizations, and redrawn the map of life on Earth more times than any geologist can count with confidence. The Atlantic does not negotiate, it does not compromise, it simply moves, and the world adjusts, and what was once connected becomes separated, and what was once whole becomes fragmented, and the fragments, left to themselves, become something entirely new. The southeastern coast of Brazil is one of the most biologically dense stretches of coastline on the planet. It is where the Atlantic forest, one of the oldest and most diverse tropical ecosystems in existence, meets the sea. This is not the Amazon. It does not sprawl across an entire continental interior. It clings to the coast, a narrow ribbon of green pressed between the mountains and the waves, and within that narrow ribbon there is more life per square meter than almost anywhere else on Earth. More species of birds, more species of amphibians, more species of plants that have never been catalogued, named, or even seen by human eyes. The Atlantic forest is ancient. It predates the separation of South America from Africa. It has survived ice ages. It has survived volcanic upheaval. It has survived in its diminished and fragmented modern form the arrival of human civilization, but it has not survived unchanged. Nothing survives unchanged. That is the first lesson the island will teach you if you're patient enough to listen. Approximately 150 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state, rising from the ocean like a clenched fist, sits Ilha de Queimada Grande. It is not large. By the standards of islands, it is barely noticeable. Roughly 43 hectares of rock and dense tropical vegetation, surrounded on all sides by deep, cold Atlantic water. It has no harbor, it has no beach worth the name. Its coastline is a jagged maze of volcanic rock and sheer cliffs that rise, in some places, to nearly 200 meters above the waterline. From a distance, if you were passing on a ship, you might not even notice it. You might see a dark hump on the horizon, partially obscured by low cloud or sea mist, and you might think it was simply another rocky outcropping, unremarkable and forgettable. You would be wrong, because this island, this tiny speck of land in the vastness of the South Atlantic, is one of the most extraordinary places on the face of the earth, not because of what human beings have built there. We have built nothing there, not because of what human beings have discovered there. Every discovery we have made has only deepened the mystery, but because of what happened there, slowly, silently, over the course of thousands of years, without any human witness, without any human participation, without any human permission. Evolution happened there. Evolution happened there in a way that it has happened in very few other places, in a compressed and concentrated form that turns the island into something like a laboratory, a sealed chamber where the forces that shape all life on Earth have been allowed to operate without interference, without interruption, without the heavy hand of human civilization tipping the scales. To understand what the island is, you have to understand what it was, and to understand what it was, you have to go back. Not hundreds of years, not thousands of years. You have to go back to the end of the last ice age, to a time when the world looked profoundly different from the world you know, when the coastlines were not where they are now, when the sea level was far lower than it is today, when land bridges connected places that are now separated by miles of open water. You have to go back to a time when Ilha de Queimada Grande was not an island at all. It was a hilltop. That is a strange thing to say about a place that is now surrounded on all sides by ocean, but it is true. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, so much of the Earth's water was locked up in continental ice sheets that the global sea level was approximately 120 meters lower than it is today. 120 meters is an enormous amount of water. It is enough to expose vast stretches of continental shelf that are now submerged. It is enough to create land bridges between continents. It is enough to connect islands to mainlands. And it is enough to transform what is now a rocky island in the Atlantic into a high point on a coastal ridge, connected by continuous dry land to the forests of what is now the Brazilian coast. During that period, the hilltop that would become Ilha de Queimada Grande was simply part of the mainland. Animals moved freely between it and the surrounding landscape. Plants grew continuously from the coastal lowlands up to the ridge. There were no barriers, no boundaries, no separation. The hilltop was home to the same species that inhabited the rest of the coastal forest, the same birds, the same insects, the same small mammals, and the same snakes. The snakes are important, but we will get to them. First, understand the landscape, understand the continuity. Understand that for thousands of years, this hilltop was just another piece of a vast, interconnected ecosystem, unremarkable in every way, no different from dozens of other high points along the same coastal ridge. The animals that lived there were not special. They were not unique. They were simply part of the general population, drifting in and out, breeding, feeding, dying, being replaced by new generations that were genetically identical to the populations on either side. Then the ice began to melt. It did not happen all at once. The end of the last ice age was not a single dramatic event. It was a process that unfolded over thousands of years, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, with periods of rapid warming interspersed with brief returns to colder conditions. But the overall trend was unmistakable. The ice was retreating, the glaciers were shrinking. And the water they released was flowing into the oceans, raising the sea level centimeter by centimeter, year by year, century by century. Along the coast of what is now Brazil, the rising water crept inland. Lowlands that had been dry for thousands of years were gradually submerged. River valleys became estuaries, estuaries became bays, and the coastal ridge that connected the hilltop to the mainland began to narrow. At first, the connection was broad and easily traversable. Animals could still move back and forth without difficulty, but as the water continued to rise, the connection became a narrow isthmus, barely wide enough for a determined land animal to cross. And then sometime around 11,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, the water closed over the last remaining connection and the hilltop became an island. This is the moment. This is the hinge point. This is where the story of Snake Island truly begins. Not with a dramatic geological cataclysm, not with a volcanic eruption or an earthquake, but with the quiet, patient, almost imperceptible rise of water over stone. One day there was a land bridge. The next day or the next year or the next decade there was not. And the animals on the hilltop, the birds and the insects and the small mammals and the snakes, were suddenly, irrevocably, permanently cut off from the rest of the world. They did not know this, of course. Animals do not understand geography. They do not draw maps. They do not comprehend the concept of an island, but they felt the effects immediately. The population of every species on the hilltop was suddenly finite. There would be no more immigration, no more fresh genetic material flowing in from the mainland, no more reinforcement from larger populations. Whatever was on the island at the moment of separation was all there would ever be. The population was closed. The system was sealed, and the clock of evolution, which had been ticking in synchrony with the mainland for thousands of years, suddenly began to tick to a different rhythm. This is what biologists call an insular population, and it is one of the most powerful forces in evolutionary biology. When a population is cut off from its parent population, it is subject to forces that do not operate or operate much more weakly in large connected populations. Genetic drift becomes more powerful, natural selection becomes more intense. Mutations that would be diluted and lost in a large population can become fixed in a small one, and the environment of the island, which is subtly but significantly different from the environment of the mainland, begins to push the population in new directions, shaping it, molding it, turning it into something that has never existed before. This is what happened on Ilha de Queimada Grande. This is what happened to the snakes, but before we talk about the snakes, we need to talk about what the island lost, because the story of Snake Island is not just a story of what evolved there. It is also a story of what disappeared there, what was subtracted, what was erased by the relentless mathematics of small population biology. When the island was first cut off from the mainland, it would have supported a community of animals roughly similar to the community on the adjacent coast. There would have been small mammals, rodents and marsupials, moving through the leaf litter and the understory. There would have been amphibians, frogs, and salamanders in the moist areas near streams and seeps. There would have been lizards, basking on rocks and hunting insects in the canopy. There would have been insects in staggering variety. And there would have been birds, both resident species that lived on the island year-round and migratory species that passed through on their seasonal journeys. But an island of 43 hectares cannot support the same diversity as a continent. The carrying capacity is too small, the resources are too limited, and over the centuries following separation, species began to disappear, not all at once and not for the same reasons, but one by one, the most vulnerable populations dwindled and vanished. Large mammals, if any had been present, would have been the first to go. Their populations would have been too small to sustain themselves, too susceptible to inbreeding, too dependent on territories larger than the island could provide. Medium-sized mammals would have followed, and eventually even some of the smaller species would have disappeared, their populations flickering like candles in a draft until the last individual died without leaving offspring. This is a process known as faunal relaxation, and it is one of the most predictable phenomena in island biogeography. When a piece of land is newly isolated, it almost always contains more species than it can sustainably support at its new, smaller size. The excess species are doomed. They are what biologists call the living dead, populations that are already committed to extinction even though individual members are still alive and still reproducing. The process of losing these excess species can take decades, centuries, or even millennia, depending on the size of the island and the biology of the species involved. But the outcome is inevitable. The island will eventually reach a new equilibrium, a smaller community of species that can sustain themselves indefinitely within the island's limited resources. On Ilha de Queimada Grande, this process of faunal relaxation reshaped the entire community. The island lost most of its terrestrial mammals. It lost most of its amphibians. It lost species that we will never know existed there because they disappeared before any scientist ever set foot on the island, before any human record was kept, before anyone was paying attention. They simply vanished, absorbed back into the soil and the leaf litter, leaving no trace except the empty niches they once occupied. And it was those empty niches, those gaps in the ecological fabric, that created the conditions for what came next. Because as the mammals disappeared, as the amphibians dwindled, as the community of terrestrial vertebrates shrank and simplified, something else was happening. Something was filling the gaps, something was expanding into the vacated ecological space, taking advantage of the reduced competition, exploiting the resources that the vanished species had left behind. The snakes were expanding. Specifically, one species of snake was expanding. Or rather, one species of snake was in the process of becoming something new, something that had never existed before, something that was uniquely and perfectly adapted to this tiny, isolated, densely vegetated scrap of rock in the South Atlantic. The ancestor of the snake that now dominates Snake Island was a species of lancehead viper, genus Bothrops, that inhabited the coastal forests of southeastern Brazil. Lanceheads are a large and diverse group of pit vipers found throughout Central and South America. They are responsible for more snakebite fatalities in the Americas than any other group of snakes. They are ambush predators, typically sitting motionless for long periods and striking with extraordinary speed when prey comes within range. They are venomous, armed with complex cocktails of enzymes and toxins that immobilize prey, begin the process of digestion, and cause severe tissue damage in any animal unfortunate enough to be bitten. The lancehead that was isolated on the island 11,000 years ago was probably similar to the mainland species known as Bothrops jararaca, the common lancehead, one of the most widespread and well-studied venomous snakes in South America. The jararaca is a generalist predator, feeding on rodents, frogs, lizards, and occasionally birds. It is adaptable, flexible in its habitat requirements, and capable of surviving in a wide range of conditions, from dense forest to agricultural land to the edges of urban areas. But the snake on the island was no longer part of the mainland population. It was cut off, isolated, subject to different pressures, different limitations, different opportunities. And over the course of thousands of years, it changed. The changes were not random. They were driven by the specific conditions of the island, and the most important of those conditions was the food supply. As the terrestrial mammals disappeared from the island, the snakes lost their primary prey base. There were no more rodents to ambush in the leaf litter, no more small marsupials to strike as they passed along their trails. The ground-level food web that had sustained lancehead vipers on the mainland for millions of years was collapsing, and the snakes had to adapt or die. They adapted, they went up. The snakes began to climb. They moved into the trees, into the canopy, into the vertical dimension of the forest that they had previously underutilized. And in the canopy they found a food source that was still abundant, still reliable, still available even as the terrestrial prey base dwindled. Birds. The island lies along a migratory route used by numerous species of birds. Twice a year during the spring and fall migrations, the island is visited by birds that stop to rest and feed during their long journeys along the coast. and year-round the island supports populations of resident birds that nest in the trees and forage in the canopy. These birds became the primary prey of the evolving lancehead population. But catching birds is not the same as catching rodents. Birds are faster. Birds are more alert. Birds can fly. A snake that strikes a rodent on the ground and misses can simply wait for the next one to come along. A snake that strikes a bird in the canopy and misses may not get a second chance. The bird will fly away and the snake will have expended precious energy for nothing. This is where the venom comes in. The venom of the mainland lancehead is designed for mammals. It is optimized to immobilize small warm-blooded animals, to cause rapid tissue damage and circulatory collapse in creatures with mammalian physiology. But the snake on the island was no longer hunting mammals. It was hunting birds, and birds are physiologically different from mammals in important ways. Their metabolism is faster. Their circulatory system operates at higher pressure. Their body temperature is higher. A venom that works perfectly on a mouse may be insufficient to quickly immobilize a bird, and speed of immobilization is critical. On the mainland, a lancehead can bite a rodent and then release it, following the scent trail as the rodent staggers away and dies within a few meters. The snake can take its time. The rodent is not going anywhere, but a bird that is bitten and released can fly. It can escape the canopy, leave the tree, travel dozens or hundreds of meters before the venom takes effect, and the snake will never find it. Every failed predation event is a waste of energy, and on an island with limited resources, wasted energy can mean the difference between survival and starvation. So the venom evolved. It became stronger, much stronger. Estimates suggest that the venom of the Golden Lancehead, as the island species came to be known, is between 3 and 5 times more potent than the venom of its mainland relative, the jararaca. Some researchers have suggested that the factor may be even higher depending on how potency is measured and which components of the venom are analyzed. The venom is fast-acting, designed to immobilize prey within seconds, not minutes. It is designed to ensure that the bird does not have time to fly away. Strike must be immediately incapacitating. There is no margin for error. This is not cruelty. This is not malice. This is efficiency. This is the cold mathematics of energy budgets on a small island with limited prey. Every calorie matters, every hunt matters, every strike must count. And the venom, honed by thousands of years of natural selection on an island where the penalty for failure is starvation and death, has become one of the most potent biological weapons in the snake world. The snake itself changed in other ways as well. Its body became more slender, better suited for climbing. Its tail became more prehensile, capable of gripping branches and supporting the snake's weight as it reached out into empty air to strike at a perching bird. Its coloration shifted, becoming a pale golden yellow that provides effective camouflage among the dead leaves and sun-bleached branches of the island's canopy. Its head, like all lanceheads, remained broad and triangular, housing the venom glands and the heat-sensing pit organs that allow it to detect warm-blooded prey in complete darkness. And its behavior changed. Mainland lanceheads are primarily terrestrial. They spend most of their time on the ground, coiled among leaf litter and fallen logs, waiting for ground-dwelling prey to pass within striking range. The Golden Lancehead is semi-arboreal. It spends significant time in trees and bushes, draped over branches, motionless, patient, waiting for a bird to land within range. It has become, through the slow pressure of natural selection, a specialist, a canopy predator, a creature uniquely adapted to the specific conditions of this specific island. This is the Golden Lancehead Viper, Bothrops insularis, and it exists nowhere else on Earth. It is an endemic species, meaning it is found only on Ilha de Queimada Grande and has never been found anywhere else, not on the mainland, not on any other island, not in any zoo or private collection that obtained its specimens from the wild, rather than from the island itself. It is a product of this island and this island alone. It was made here by the specific combination of isolation, limited resources, and the relentless pressure of natural selection operating in a closed system over thousands of years. And there are a lot of them. Estimates of the snake population on the island have varied widely over the years, and arriving at a precise number is extraordinarily difficult for reasons that will become clear. Early estimates, some of them based more on reputation than on rigorous science, suggested that there might be 1 snake per square meter on the island. This is almost certainly an exaggeration, but it captures something true about the feeling of the place, about the density of serpentine life that confronts anyone who steps into the interior. More recent and more careful estimates, based on marked recapture studies and systematic surveys, suggest a population of somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 individual golden lanceheads on the island. That may not sound like a lot, but remember the size of the island. 43 hectares, that is less than half a square kilometer. Even at the lower estimate of 2,000 snakes, that is roughly one snake for every 200 square meters. At the higher estimate, it is one snake for every 100 square meters. In practical terms, this means that in any given area of forest on the island, you are rarely more than a few meters from a venomous snake, and often you are much closer than that. The density is not uniform. The snakes are more concentrated in some areas than others, tending to cluster in zones with the best hunting opportunities, areas where birds are most likely to land, areas with the right combination of canopy cover and exposed perching sites. But even in the less populated areas, the snakes are present. They are always present. There is no part of the island where you can be confident that you are not within striking distance of a golden lancehead. This is what makes the island so remarkable and so dangerous. It is not that there is a venomous snake somewhere on the island that you might theoretically encounter if you are unlucky. It is that there are venomous snakes everywhere on the island, and you will certainly encounter them if you spend any time there at all. The question is not whether you will see a snake. The question is whether you will see the snake before it sees you. And given the snake's camouflage, its stillness, and its tendency to occupy positions at head height and chest height in the vegetation, the answer is often no. You will not see it in time. Let us pause here and consider what we have described so far. We have described a geological event, the separation of a hilltop from the mainland by rising sea levels. We have described an ecological process, faunal relaxation, the loss of species from a newly isolated habitat. We have described an evolutionary response, the transformation of a generalist mainland snake into a specialist island predator with dramatically enhanced venom. And we have described a population density that is, by any standard, extraordinary. But we have not yet described the island itself. We have not walked its trails such as they are. We have not pushed through its vegetation. We have not felt the humidity, the heat, the claustrophobic density of the forest that covers nearly every inch of its surface. We have not stood on its cliffs and looked out at the ocean and understood, viscerally, physically, what it means to be isolated, what it means to be cut off. What it means to be in a place that is not connected to anything, that is not part of any network, that is not accessible by any road or bridge or causeway, that can only be reached by boat across open water, and that once reached offers no comfortable landing, no safe harbor, no flat ground, no cleared path, no sign that human beings have any business being there. The island's terrain is brutal. The coastline is almost entirely rocky, with cliffs that drop straight into deep water on the seaward side and tumbled boulder fields on the leeward side. There is one small area where landing a boat is possible, a narrow indentation in the coastline where the rocks are low enough and the water shallow enough to allow a small craft to pull close and discharge passengers. But even this landing spot is treacherous, subject to swells and currents, slippery with algae, and requiring careful timing to avoid being dashed against the rocks. From the landing area, a rough trail leads upward into the interior of the island. This trail, if it can be called that, is not maintained by any park service or tourism board. It exists only because researchers and Brazilian Navy personnel have walked it enough times to keep the vegetation from closing it entirely. It is steep, often muddy, and frequently blocked by fallen branches and encroaching undergrowth. Within minutes of leaving the coastline, you are enveloped by the forest. The canopy closes overhead. The light dims. The air becomes thick and humid, heavy with the smell of decomposing vegetation and the faint, musky scent that experienced herpetologists learn to associate with the presence of large numbers of snakes. The vegetation on the island is dense, extremely dense. The forest is a tangle of trees, shrubs, vines, epiphytes, and bromeliads, layered and interwoven in a three-dimensional matrix that makes movement difficult and visibility poor. You cannot see more than a few meters in any direction. The ground is covered with a thick layer of leaf litter, concealing roots, rocks, and anything else that might be lying on the forest floor. The understory is crowded with saplings, ferns, and low-growing plants that press against you as you push through. And above you, the canopy forms a nearly continuous roof of leaves and branches that filters the sunlight into a dim, greenish twilight. It is in this twilight that the snakes wait. They are not always easy to see. The golden lancehead's pale coloration blends remarkably well with the dead leaves, the lichens, the sun-bleached bark of the island's trees. A snake coiled on a branch at eye level can be nearly invisible until you are close enough to touch it. A snake lying in the leaf litter can be completely hidden, indistinguishable from the surrounding debris, until your foot comes down inches away and the snake reacts. The reaction is fast. Pit vipers are among the fastest striking snakes in the world, capable of launching their entire body forward in a fraction of a second, fangs extended, mouth open, delivering a dose of venom that can cause severe tissue damage, systemic toxicity, and in the absence of medical treatment, death. The golden lancehead is no exception. Its strike is a blur, almost impossible to see with the naked eye, and by the time your brain has registered the movement, the bite has already been delivered. This speed is not an accident. It is an adaptation, refined over thousands of years of hunting birds that are themselves fast, alert, and capable of escape. The snake cannot afford a slow strike. A slow strike means a missed meal, and a missed meal on this island can mean weeks or months of fasting, of slowly depleting energy reserves, of inching closer to the threshold below which survival is no longer possible. We should talk about what the venom does, because understanding the venom is essential to understanding the island. The venom of the golden lancehead is a complex mixture of proteins and enzymes, each with a specific function. Some components are hemotoxic, meaning they destroy red blood cells and disrupt the blood's ability to clot. Some are proteolytic, meaning they break down proteins, essentially digesting tissue from the inside. Some are myotoxic, meaning they attack muscle tissue. And some components have effects on the cardiovascular system, causing drops in blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, and in severe cases, cardiac arrest. In a bird, which is the snake's natural prey, the effect of the venom is rapid and devastating. The bird is immobilized within seconds, unable to fly, unable to flee. The hemotoxic and proteolytic components begin the process of digestion almost immediately, softening the tissues and making the prey easier to swallow and metabolize. The snake, which may have waited days or weeks for this meal, can begin feeding with confidence that its prey is not going anywhere. In a human being, the effects are similar but scaled to a much larger body. The initial bite is painful, but the real damage comes in the hours that follow, as the venom spreads through the tissues and the bloodstream. Swelling at the bite site can be dramatic, sometimes involving an entire limb. Blistering and necrosis of the skin and underlying tissue are common. Internal bleeding can occur as the blood loses its ability to clot. Kidney failure can result from the breakdown products of destroyed red blood cells overwhelming the kidney's filtration capacity. And in the absence of antivenom, which must be specific to the species and administered in a timely manner, the outcome can be fatal. There is a detail about the island that makes this medical reality particularly terrifying, and it is a detail that is often overlooked in the more sensational accounts. The island is approximately 33 kilometers from the nearest point on the mainland coast. In good weather with a fast boat, the crossing takes roughly 30 minutes to an hour. In bad weather, which is frequent in this part of the Atlantic, the crossing can take much longer, and in severe conditions it may not be possible at all. There is no medical facility on the island. There is no antivenom on the island. There is no doctor, no nurse, no paramedic, no anyone with medical training stationed on the island because no one lives on the island. It has been uninhabited for decades. This means that if you are bitten by a golden lancehead on Ilha de Queimada Grande, you must first make your way back to the landing site, which may involve traversing hundreds of meters of dense forest inhabited by thousands of additional venomous snakes. While the venom is spreading through your body and your ability to walk, to think clearly, to make good decisions is progressively deteriorating. You must then get into a boat and make a crossing of open ocean that may take an hour or more. And you must then find a hospital that has the appropriate antivenom in stock, which is not guaranteed, because golden lancehead venom is distinct from the venom of mainland species, and the antivenom must be matched to the specific venom profile. The practical reality is that a serious envenomation on the island would be extremely difficult to treat in time. The window between the bite and the onset of irreversible damage is narrow, and the distance to medical care is long. This is not a theoretical concern. It is a real and present danger that shapes every decision made by every researcher who sets foot on the island. The Brazilian government recognized this danger long ago. The island has been closed to the public since the early 1980s. Access is restricted by law, and permission to visit is granted only to approved scientific researchers, accompanied by Brazilian Navy personnel. The Navy operates a lighthouse on the island, one of the few structures on the island which has been automated for years, eliminating the need for a permanent human presence. Before the automation, lighthouse keepers lived on the island, and their stories, some documented, some passed down as oral tradition, form a dark and cautionary chapter in the island's history. The stories are difficult to verify in their specifics, but the general outlines are consistent across multiple sources. Lighthouse keepers and their families lived on the island in conditions of constant vigilance. Snakes entered the lighthouse. Snakes entered the living quarters. Snakes were found in beds, in cabinets, in the eaves of the roof. Bites occurred. Deaths occurred. According to one widely reported account, an entire family, a lighthouse keeper, his wife, and their children, were killed by snakes that entered the house through windows. According to another account, a keeper who was bitten fled the lighthouse and ran into the forest, where he was bitten multiple times before he could reach the shore. His body was found on the rocks. These stories, whether strictly factual in every detail or embellished by time and retelling, convey a truth that is supported by the science. The island is not a place where human beings can live safely. It is not a place where the normal strategies of coexistence with wildlife are sufficient. On the mainland, in most environments, you can learn the patterns. You can learn where the snakes are likely to be and where they are not. You can learn when they are active and when they are dormant. You can learn to avoid the places and times of greatest risk, and you can reduce the probability of an encounter to an acceptably low level. On this island, those strategies do not work. The snakes are everywhere. They are active at all times of day. They occupy every level of the forest, from the ground to the canopy. There are no safe zones, no predictable patterns, no reliable rules of avoidance. The density of the population is simply too high for any strategy of avoidance to be effective. You cannot watch every branch. You cannot check every leaf. You cannot maintain the level of vigilance required to ensure that you will not accidentally place your hand on a coiled snake or step on one hidden in the leaf litter. The human brain is not designed for that level of sustained alertness. It will lapse, it will become distracted, it will miss something. And on this island, the consequence of missing something is a bite from one of the most venomous snakes in the Western Hemisphere. This is why researchers who work on the island take extraordinary precautions. They wear thick leather boots and heavy gloves. They use long-handled tools to move vegetation before stepping through it. They work in pairs, with one person watching for snakes while the other collects data. They move slowly, deliberately checking every surface before touching it, and they limit their time on the island to the absolute minimum required to accomplish their research objectives, because they know that the longer they stay, the higher the probability that something will go wrong. Despite these precautions, close encounters are common. Researchers report snakes within centimeters of their faces, snakes draped over equipment. Snakes on the trail ahead, motionless and nearly invisible until the researcher is almost on top of them. The psychological toll of this kind of sustained exposure to danger is significant. Researchers describe a state of hypervigilance that is exhausting, both mentally and physically. They describe the difficulty of maintaining concentration for hours at a time in conditions of extreme heat and humidity, while simultaneously performing complex scientific tasks and watching for snakes in every direction, including above. Some researchers have described the island as the most psychologically challenging environment they have ever worked in, more so than war zones, more so than deep underwater, more so than the Arctic. Reason, they say, is the combination of sustained danger with unpredictability. In a war zone, you can identify the likely direction of threat. Underwater, you can monitor your equipment and follow established safety protocols. In the Arctic, you can watch for polar bears and take shelter from the cold. But on Snake Island, the threat is omnidirectional, constant, and invisible. You cannot see it until it is too late, and you cannot protect yourself completely no matter what precautions you take. We need to return now to the science, because the science is what makes the island important, not just as a dangerous place, not just as a curiosity, not just as a setting for sensational television programs and viral internet articles, but as a genuinely significant subject of biological research. The Golden Lancehead Viper is critically endangered. This may seem paradoxical. How can a species that dominates its environment so completely, that has achieved population densities that are extraordinary by any standard, that has no natural predators on the island and an apparently reliable food supply, how can such a species be critically endangered? The answer lies in the concept of range. A species' conservation status is determined not just by how many individuals exist, but by how much territory they occupy. A species with a large population spread across a wide geographic range is generally considered secure, even if individual populations fluctuate. But a species that exists in only one location, no matter how abundant it may be in that location, is inherently vulnerable. A single catastrophic event, a disease, a severe storm, an invasive species, a human-caused disturbance, could wipe out the entire species in one stroke. The Golden Lancehead occupies exactly one location. One island, 43 hectares, that is all. If that island were destroyed, if the forest were cleared, if a disease swept through the population, if an invasive predator were introduced, the species would be gone, extinct, forever. There is no backup population. There is no second chance. There is no other island where a few individuals might survive and rebuild. There is only Ilha de Queimada Grande, and there is only the Golden Lancehead, and the two are inseparable. Island created the snake, and the snake, in a very real sense, defines the island. This vulnerability is compounded by the genetic consequences of small population size. For 11,000 years, the Golden Lancehead population has been reproducing in a closed system. There has been no influx of new genetic material from outside populations. Every individual on the island is descended from the small founding population that was cut off from the mainland at the end of the last ice age. Over thousands of generations, genetic diversity has inevitably declined. Harmful recessive mutations that would be diluted and eliminated in a large, genetically diverse population can become fixed in a small, isolated one. This is a process known as genetic drift, and it is one of the most significant threats facing small populations. Studies of the Golden Lancehead's genetics have confirmed what theory predicts. The species shows reduced genetic diversity compared to its mainland relatives. There is evidence of inbreeding, and there are morphological anomalies in some individuals, unusual scale patterns, asymmetries, variations in coloration that may be indicators of inbreeding depression, the accumulation of harmful genetic effects that results from breeding between closely related individuals over many generations. This does not mean the species is on the verge of collapse. The population has persisted for 11,000 years, which suggests that it has found a way to cope with the constraints of small population size. Natural selection, operating with particular intensity on an island where resources are limited and every individual must be maximally efficient, may have purged some of the most harmful mutations from the population. And the population may be large enough, at 2,000 to 4,000 individuals, to maintain sufficient genetic diversity for long-term survival, at least under current conditions. But current conditions are not guaranteed. The world is changing, climate is changing. Sea levels are rising again, this time driven not by the natural cycles of glaciation and deglaciation, but by human-caused global warming. The Atlantic forest, of which the island's vegetation is a remnant, has been reduced to a fraction of its original extent by centuries of deforestation, and the fragments that remain are under constant pressure. Air and water temperatures in the region are shifting, and these shifts could affect the island's microclimate, its vegetation, its insect populations, and ultimately its birds, which are the foundation of the Golden Lancehead's food supply. The snake is also threatened by a more immediate and more direct human activity, poaching. The Golden Lancehead, precisely because of its rarity, its uniqueness, and the potency of its venom, is highly valued on the black market. Collectors will pay substantial sums for a live specimen. Biomedical researchers are interested in the venom, which contains compounds with potential pharmaceutical applications. And there is a persistent, if small, demand from private collectors who want to own one of the most dangerous snakes in the world. The Brazilian government has taken steps to combat poaching. The island is patrolled by the Navy. Access is controlled. Penalties for illegal collection are severe. But the remoteness of the island makes enforcement difficult, and there have been documented cases of individuals attempting to reach the island by boat and collect snakes for sale. Now let us consider something that is often overlooked in discussions of Snake Island, and that is the role of the island as a self-contained ecosystem, a biological system that operates according to its own rules, on its own schedule, without reference to or dependence on the human world. The island does not need us. This is a simple statement, but its implications are profound. We live in an age when human beings have modified nearly every ecosystem on the planet. We have cleared forests, dammed rivers, introduced species, removed species, altered the chemistry of the atmosphere and the oceans. We have become, in the language of geology, a planetary force, an agent of change comparable in its effects to volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts. And we have developed a corresponding sense of responsibility, or at least a corresponding sense of entitlement, a belief that we can and should manage the natural world, that we can fix what is broken, restore what is damaged, optimize what is suboptimal. But the island does not need to be managed. It does not need to be fixed. It does not need to be optimized. It has been running itself for 11,000 years, and it has done so with a success that is, by any objective measure, remarkable. The Golden Lancehead has survived, the vegetation has survived, the insect populations have survived, the birds continue to visit. The entire system, predator and prey, producer and consumer, has maintained itself in a dynamic equilibrium that has persisted across millennia of changing climate, changing sea levels, and changing conditions. This does not mean the system is static. It is not. It is constantly changing, constantly adjusting, constantly responding to fluctuations in temperature, rainfall, food availability, and the dozens of other variables that affect every ecosystem. But it is changing on its own terms, according to its own logic, at its own pace. It is not waiting for human intervention. It is not asking for help. It is simply doing what it has always done, existing, persisting, evolving, in the way that life has always existed and persisted and evolved, long before human beings appeared and long after we will be gone. This is a humbling thought. We are accustomed to seeing ourselves as the central actors in the drama of life on Earth. We are accustomed to believing that our presence matters, that our actions are consequential, that our decisions shape the future of the planet. And in many cases, this is true. Our impact on the global environment has been enormous and is continuing to grow. But on this island, our presence is irrelevant. The island does not know we exist. The snakes do not know we exist. The system operates independently of us, and our attempts to intervene, however well-intentioned, would be more likely to cause harm than good. This is not a hypothetical concern. There have been proposals over the years to manage the Golden Lancehead population in various ways. Some have suggested establishing a captive breeding program, moving some individuals to a secure facility on the mainland to serve as an insurance population in case of catastrophe on the island. Others have suggested introducing genetic diversity by bringing in closely related mainland species and allowing them to interbreed with the island population. Still others have suggested controlling the vegetation on the island to create more favorable habitat for the snakes or their prey. Each of these proposals has merit in the abstract, but each also carries significant risks. A captive breeding program, for example, would require the capture of wild snakes, reducing the already small island population. Captive bred snakes might not survive reintroduction to the wild, as they would lack the behavioral adaptations that island-born snakes develop over their lifetimes. Introducing mainland species could disrupt the genetic integrity of the island population, diluting the specific adaptations that make the Golden Lancehead what it is. And manipulating the vegetation could alter the habitat in unpredictable ways, potentially benefiting some species at the expense of others and destabilizing the equilibrium that has kept the system functioning for thousands of years. The lesson, and it is a lesson that applies far beyond this one island, is that not every problem has a solution, and not every system needs to be fixed. Some things are best left alone. Some places are best observed from a distance, studied with care, and allowed to continue on their own path, even if that path is uncertain, even if the outcome is unknown, even if our instinct is to reach in and adjust and control. Now let us talk about what happens when you try to study this island. Because the scientific challenges are as formidable as the physical ones, herpetologists, the scientists who study reptiles and amphibians, have been visiting Ilha de Queimada Grande since the early 20th century. The first scientific descriptions of the Golden Lancehead were published in the 1920s, based on specimens collected by researchers who braved the island's dangers to bring back dead or preserved snakes for study. Over the decades that followed, additional expeditions added to the scientific knowledge, documenting the snake's behavior, its diet, its reproductive biology, and its venom chemistry. But the research has always been constrained by the conditions on the island. Visits are short, typically lasting only a few days. The number of researchers who can be on the island at any one time is small, limited by safety considerations and by the carrying capacity of the boats that make the crossing. The terrain is difficult, the vegetation is dense, and the snakes are everywhere, which makes systematic surveying extremely challenging. Consider the task of counting the snakes. This is one of the most basic requirements of wildlife management and conservation, simply knowing how many individuals are in a population. On the mainland, for most species, this can be accomplished through a variety of standard techniques: visual surveys, camera traps, track counts, mark recapture studies. But on Snake Island, each of these techniques is complicated by the unique conditions. Visual surveys require moving through the forest and counting every snake you see, but the snakes are camouflaged, motionless, and often hidden in dense vegetation. You will miss many of them. How many? It is impossible to say with precision. The detection probability, the fraction of snakes actually present that are seen by a surveyor, is unknown and probably quite low. This means that any count based on visual surveys is a minimum estimate, potentially a significant underestimate. Mark recapture studies require capturing individual snakes, marking them in some way that allows them to be identified if they are captured again, and then releasing them. By comparing the number of marked individuals recaptured in subsequent sessions with the total number captured, statisticians can estimate the total population size. This technique works well for many species, but on Snake Island, it requires researchers to physically handle large numbers of venomous snakes, a dangerous and time-consuming process. And the snakes must be marked in a way that does not harm them, does not alter their behavior, and persists long enough to be detectable on subsequent captures. Scale clipping, paint marking, and implanted transponders have all been used, with varying degrees of success and varying degrees of risk to both the snakes and the researchers. Camera traps, which have revolutionized wildlife research in many ecosystems, are less useful on Snake Island because the snakes are often above ground level, in the branches and canopy, where camera traps are difficult to position and where the dense vegetation interferes with detection. And the snakes are ambush predators that can remain motionless for days or weeks, which means that a camera positioned in front of a snake might not detect any movement for an extended period, making it difficult to distinguish between an area with many motionless snakes and an area with no snakes at all. The result is that our knowledge of the golden lancehead population, despite decades of research, remains imprecise. We know approximately how many snakes there are, but we do not know exactly. We know approximately what they eat, but we do not have a complete picture of their diet. We know approximately how they reproduce, but there are aspects of their reproductive biology that are still poorly understood. We know that the population is genetically depauperate, but we do not know exactly how much genetic diversity has been lost or how much remains. We know that the population is vulnerable, but we do not know exactly how vulnerable or what specific threats are most likely to push it over the edge. This uncertainty is itself a kind of lesson. The island resists our attempts to quantify it, to reduce it to numbers and statistics, to fit it into the frameworks and models that we use to manage wildlife populations elsewhere. It is too complex, too dense, too dangerous, too alien for our standard tools and techniques to work properly. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much we do not know. Let us now turn to a subject that is rarely discussed in popular accounts of Snake Island, but is essential to understanding the island as an ecosystem. Let us talk about the other inhabitants, because the golden lancehead, spectacular and terrifying as it is not the only living thing on the island. It is the apex predator, the dominant vertebrate, the species that captures the imagination and drives the narrative. But it exists within a web of ecological relationships that includes dozens of other species, each with its own role, its own adaptations, its own evolutionary history. The birds, as we have discussed, are the primary prey of the golden lancehead. The island's avifauna includes both resident species and migratory visitors. Among the residents are several species of passerines, small perching birds that nest and feed on the island year-round. These birds are the backbone of the snake's diet, and their populations are directly linked to the snake population through the predator-prey dynamic that has shaped both for thousands of years. The migratory birds are a seasonal bonus, a pulse of additional prey that arrives twice a year and provides a temporary abundance that may be critical for the snake's reproductive success. Many of the migratory species that stop on the island are small insectivores and frugivores, birds that feed on the island's insects and fruits during their brief stopovers. They are vulnerable to predation because they are unfamiliar with the island's dangers. They do not know, as the resident birds may have learned over generations, where the snakes are most likely to be, where the safe perching sites are, where the danger zones lie. The insects are another critical component of the system. The island supports a diverse community of insects, including beetles, ants, flies, moths, butterflies, and spiders. These insects are the primary food source for many of the island's birds, and they play essential roles in pollination, decomposition, and nutrient cycling. Without the insects, the birds would not be there. Without the birds, the snakes would not be there. The entire system is linked, from the smallest mite to the largest viper, in a chain of dependencies that extends through every level of the food web. The vegetation, too, is a crucial part of the system. The island's plant community includes a mix of tropical forest species, many of them shared with the Atlantic forest of the mainland. Trees, shrubs, vines, epiphytes, bromeliads, ferns, mosses, and lichens cover nearly every surface, creating the dense, multi-layered habitat that the snakes and the birds and the insects depend on. The vegetation provides food for the insects and the birds, shelter for the snakes, and the structural framework of the entire ecosystem. Without the forest, there would be no island ecosystem. There would be only bare rock, and this brings us to a critical point about the island's vulnerability. The forest is not invulnerable. It is subject to the same pressures that affect forests everywhere: drought, storms, fire, disease, invasive species. A severe drought could stress the trees and reduce the insect population, which would reduce the bird population, which would reduce the snake population. A major storm could flatten large areas of canopy, destroying the hunting habitat that the snakes depend on. A fire, whether natural or human-caused, could devastate the vegetation and with it the entire ecosystem. In fact, the island's name, Queimada Grande, is itself a reference to fire. Queimada means burned in Portuguese, and the name suggests that at some point in the past, parts of the island were burned, possibly by early visitors who attempted to clear the vegetation before establishing the lighthouse. The extent and impact of any historical fires on the island's ecosystem are unknown, but the name itself is a reminder that the island is not immune to disturbance, that its apparent stability is underlain by a fragility that could be exposed by a single catastrophic event. Let us consider the lighthouse for a moment, because the lighthouse is one of the few points of contact between the human world and the island's ecosystem, and its history illuminates the difficulty of maintaining any kind of human presence in this environment. The lighthouse on Ilha de Queimada Grande was established in the early 20th century, part of a network of navigational aids along the Brazilian coast. Its purpose was practical, to warn ships of the island's presence and guide them safely past the rocky shoreline. The lighthouse required maintenance, which meant that someone had to live on the island or at least visit regularly to keep the light functioning. The early lighthouse keepers were, by all accounts, tough and resourceful individuals accustomed to isolation and hardship, but nothing in their experience prepared them for the conditions on Snake Island. The snakes were not just a nuisance. They were a constant, inescapable threat that pervaded every aspect of daily life. Keepers reported finding snakes inside the lighthouse, inside the keepers' quarters, inside storage rooms and equipment sheds. Snakes dropped from overhead structures. Snakes emerged from crevices in the walls. Snakes appeared in places that had been checked and cleared only minutes before. The keepers developed strategies for coping. They cleared vegetation around the lighthouse, creating a buffer zone that was easier to monitor. They sealed doors and windows as tightly as possible. They wore heavy boots and carried tools for removing snakes from their living space, but the strategies were only partially effective. The snakes were too numerous, too persistent, too adept at finding their way into any enclosed space. The decision to automate the lighthouse, eliminating the need for permanent keepers, was driven at least in part by the safety concerns associated with the snakes. The automation was a technological solution to a biological problem, a recognition that the island's environment was simply too hostile for sustained human habitation. The automated light requires periodic maintenance, which is carried out by Navy personnel during brief, carefully planned visits, but no one lives on the island anymore. The last keeper departed decades ago, and the island has been uninhabited ever since. There is a broader lesson here, and it is worth stating plainly. Human beings are extraordinarily adaptable creatures. We have colonized every continent. We have built cities in deserts and on ice sheets. We have lived at the bottom of the ocean and in orbit around the Earth. We pride ourselves on our ability to modify any environment to suit our needs, to overcome any obstacle through technology and ingenuity. But there are places where this confidence is misplaced. There are places where the environment pushes back harder than we can push forward, where the density and intensity of biological danger exceeds our capacity to manage it, where the only rational response is to withdraw and acknowledge that we are not welcome, that we do not belong, that our presence creates more problems than it solves. Snake Island is one of those places. This is not a failure of human capability. It is a recognition of limits. And limits in the context of our relationship with the natural world are not weaknesses to be overcome. They are boundaries to be respected. The island does not need us to be brave. It does not need us to be clever. It does not need us to prove that we can survive there. It needs us to stay away, or at least to visit only briefly, only carefully, only with the knowledge that we are guests in a house that was not built for us and that will endure long after we have gone. Let us return now to the evolutionary story, because there are aspects of it that we have not yet explored, and they are some of the most fascinating. The Golden Lancehead is not the only species on the island that has evolved in response to its isolation. The entire community has been shaped by the same forces that shaped the snake, the same constraints of limited space, limited resources, and genetic isolation. But the snake, because it is the apex predator, because it is the most conspicuous and the most studied, has received the most attention. One of the most interesting aspects of the Golden Lancehead's evolution is the question of intersexuality. A significant proportion of Golden Lanceheads, estimated at around 5 to 10% of the population, show signs of intersexuality, individuals with both male and female reproductive characteristics. This is unusual in snakes and is thought to be a consequence of the genetic bottleneck and inbreeding that have characterized the population since its isolation. Intersexuality can reduce reproductive fitness, as intersex individuals may have difficulty reproducing successfully. In a large population, this would be a minor issue, but in a small population, every individual's reproductive success matters, and a significant proportion of intersex individuals could have measurable effects on population growth and viability. Another consequence of the small population size is a phenomenon known as the founder effect. The founding population of golden lanceheads, the group of snakes that was on the hilltop when it became an island, was probably quite small. Any unusual genetic characteristics present in that founding group would have been amplified in subsequent generations, simply because the founder's genes constituted the entire gene pool. Traits that might have been rare or absent in the mainland population could have become common or even universal in the island population, purely by chance. This may explain some of the distinctive characteristics of the golden lancehead, beyond those that can be attributed to natural selection for bird hunting efficiency. The snake's coloration, its size, its temperament, even aspects of its venom chemistry, may reflect not only adaptation to island conditions, but also the random genetic legacy of its founders. The interplay between selection and drift, between adaptation and chance, is one of the central themes of evolutionary biology, and Snake Island is a textbook illustration of how these forces operate in small, isolated populations. The island is, in a very real sense, a natural experiment, a sealed system where the basic processes of evolution, mutation, selection, drift, and isolation can be observed in a relatively pure form, uncomplicated by the gene flow and environmental variability that characterize larger, more connected populations. This is why the island is scientifically valuable, not just as a curiosity, but as a research site of genuine importance. The golden lancehead is a living example of speciation in action, of the process by which new species arise from existing ones through the accumulation of genetic and phenotypic differences over time. The snake has not yet diverged so far from its mainland relatives that it cannot interbreed with them, at least in principle, but it has diverged far enough to be recognized as a distinct species, with its own morphology, its own behavior, its own venom chemistry, and its own ecological niche. In another few thousand years, the divergence may be complete. The golden lancehead may become so genetically distinct from the mainland lanceheads that interbreeding would be impossible even if the opportunity arose. At that point, the speciation process would be complete, and the island would have produced a truly new form of life, a species that owes its existence entirely to the accident of geography that separated a hilltop from a continent at the end of the last ice age. This is evolution in real time, slow, patient, invisible to the casual observer, but inexorable. The island is a machine for making new species, and the golden lancehead is its most conspicuous product. But the venom deserves further attention, because the venom is not just a weapon, it is a library. It is a collection of molecules, each one the product of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, each one fine-tuned to perform a specific biological function with extraordinary efficiency. And those molecules have properties that are of intense interest to biomedical researchers. Snake venoms have been a source of medically important compounds for decades. The best-known example is captopril, a drug used to treat hypertension, which was developed from a compound found in the venom of the jararaca, the golden lancehead's mainland relative. Captopril works by inhibiting an enzyme called angiotensin-converting enzyme, or ACE, which plays a key role in regulating blood pressure. By blocking this enzyme, captopril lowers blood pressure and reduces the workload on the heart. It has been one of the most widely prescribed drugs in the world and has saved countless lives. The compound in the jararaca's venom that led to captopril was originally used by the snake to immobilize its prey by causing a sudden drop in blood pressure. In the prey animal, this drop in blood pressure leads to loss of consciousness and rapid incapacitation. In a human patient, the same pharmacological principle, carefully controlled and delivered in precise doses, provides a powerful and effective treatment for a serious medical condition. The golden lancehead's venom, which is more potent than the jararaca's, contains a similar but distinct suite of pharmacologically active compounds. Researchers have identified components that show promise as potential treatments for blood clotting disorders, cardiovascular disease, and even certain types of cancer. The venom contains enzymes that can dissolve blood clots with remarkable specificity, attacking only the clot and leaving the surrounding tissue unharmed. It contains peptides that can selectively target cancer cells, disrupting their ability to grow and divide. It contains compounds that can modulate the immune system, potentially useful in the treatment of autoimmune diseases and inflammatory conditions. The potential pharmaceutical value of the Golden Lancehead's venom is enormous, and it provides an additional reason, beyond the purely scientific, for the protection and conservation of the species. If the Golden Lancehead were to go extinct, its unique venom chemistry would be lost forever, and with it, the potential for new drugs that could benefit millions of people. This is one of the most powerful arguments for biodiversity conservation, the argument that every species is a potential source of new medicines, new materials, new technologies, and that the loss of any species is a loss of possibilities that we cannot foresee and cannot replace. But there is a tension here, and it is a tension that pervades the entire field of biodiversity conservation. The very qualities that make the Golden Lancehead scientifically and pharmaceutically valuable, its rarity, its uniqueness, its potent venom, also make it a target for exploitation. Collectors want it because it is rare, researchers want its venom because it is unique, and the demand for both creates a pressure on the wild population that could, if unchecked, push the species toward extinction. This tension is not unique to Snake Island. It is a recurring theme in conservation biology, the dilemma of how to protect a species whose very protection draws attention to its value and thereby increases the incentive to exploit it. There is no easy resolution. The best that can be done is to control access, enforce protections, and support research that can utilize small quantities of venom collected by authorized researchers without significantly impacting the wild population. The Brazilian government, to its credit, has been largely effective in protecting the island and its inhabitants. The access restrictions are real and are enforced. The Navy's presence, while intermittent, serves as a deterrent to poachers. And the scientific community has been responsible in its use of collected specimens, generally working with small sample sizes and sharing venom and genetic material among institutions to minimize the need for repeated collection trips. But the future is uncertain, as it always is. The island faces threats that cannot be addressed by access restrictions and Navy patrols. Climate change is altering the patterns of temperature and rainfall that the island's ecosystem has adapted to over thousands of years. Rising sea levels, while unlikely to submerge the island entirely given its elevation, could alter the coastline and reduce the already limited terrestrial area. Changes in ocean temperature and circulation could affect the migratory patterns of the birds that are the snake's primary food source, and the progressive degradation of the Atlantic forest on the mainland, which provides habitat for the migratory birds during the portions of the year they are not on or near the island, could reduce the number of birds available. Each of these threats is indirect. None of them is a direct assault on the snake population. But each one pulls at a thread in the web of ecological relationships that sustains the system, and if enough threads are pulled, the web will unravel. Let us spend a moment considering the island from the perspective of the birds. This is a perspective that is rarely adopted in discussions of Snake Island because the birds are the prey, and our attention is naturally drawn to the predator. But the birds are essential. Without them, the system collapses. The birds that visit the island are, for the most part, small passerines, songbirds and their relatives, weighing a few grams to a few tens of grams. They are insectivores and frugivores, feeding on the island's insects and fruits during their brief stops. For these birds, the island is a rest stop, a place to refuel during a long migratory journey, or a feeding ground for resident populations that have adapted to the island's conditions. The resident birds on the island exist in a constant state of predation pressure. They live their entire lives in the presence of a predator that is specifically evolved to hunt them, and they have presumably developed behavioral adaptations to minimize their risk. These adaptations might include specific perching preferences, avoidance of certain areas of the canopy, heightened vigilance, or alarm calls that warn other birds of the presence of a snake. But these adaptations have not been extensively studied, because studying bird behavior on Snake Island is, for obvious reasons, extremely difficult. The migratory birds arriving from the mainland may not have these adaptations. They are encountering the island and its predators for the first time, and they are particularly vulnerable. This naivety may be an important factor in the snake's hunting success, and it may help explain why the snake population is as large as it is. The seasonal influx of naive, vulnerable prey provides a nutritional bonanza that may be critical for the snake's reproductive cycle. But what happens if the migrants stop coming? What happens if changes in the mainland environment deforestation, urbanization, pesticide use, reduced the populations of migratory birds to the point where fewer of them pass through the island. What happens if changes in climate alter the timing of migration so that the birds arrive at the island when conditions are less favorable, when the snakes are less active, when the synchrony between predator and prey is disrupted? These are not hypothetical questions. They are real possibilities, and they illustrate the fragility of the system. The island is self-contained, yes. It has maintained itself for 11,000 years, yes, but it is not independent of the world beyond its shores. It depends on the birds, and the birds depend on the mainland, and the mainland is being altered by human activity at a pace and scale that has no precedent in the island's history. This is one of the paradoxes of Snake Island. It is both isolated and connected. It is both independent and dependent. It is both robust and fragile. It has survived for millennia, but it may not survive the current century, not because of anything that happens on the island itself, but because of what happens on the mainland, hundreds of kilometers away, in places that have no obvious connection to this rocky outcrop in the Atlantic. Now let us consider the matter of exploration. Not scientific research, which is conducted with specific objectives, limited time frames, and careful planning, but exploration in the broader sense, the human desire to go to places, to see them, to experience them, to know them firsthand. This is a fundamental human impulse, one of the deepest and most persistent drives in our species. We explore because we are curious, because we are restless, because we believe that understanding comes from direct experience, from placing our bodies in the landscape and perceiving it with our own senses. Snake Island challenges this impulse in a way that few other places do. It is not inaccessible in the way that a deep ocean trench or a remote mountaintop is inaccessible. It is right there, visible from the coast on a clear day, reachable by boat in less than an hour. It is not hidden. It is not unknown, it is not shrouded in mystery. We know exactly where it is, what is on it, and why it is dangerous. And yet we cannot explore it, not freely, not safely, not in the way that we explore other places. The reason is not simply that it is dangerous. Many places are dangerous. The summit of Everest is dangerous. The depths of the Mariana Trench are dangerous. The interior of an active volcano is dangerous. But in each of these cases, the danger can be managed through technology, through training, through careful planning and execution. We can bring oxygen to the top of Everest. We can build submersibles to withstand the pressure of the deep ocean. We can design heat-resistant instruments to probe the interior of a volcano. The danger is finite, bounded, predictable. It can be measured and mitigated. On Snake Island, the danger is different. It is not finite. It is not bounded. It is not predictable. It is everywhere, all the time, in every direction, and it takes a form that our technology and our training are poorly equipped to handle. We cannot build a suit of armor that will protect us from a snake strike to the face. We cannot design a sensor that will detect every snake in a dense tropical forest. We cannot train our eyes to see what is, by evolutionary design, invisible. And we cannot sustain the level of vigilance required to avoid all risk for more than a few hours at a time without experiencing the kind of mental exhaustion that actually increases risk by degrading our attention and judgment. The island, in other words, defeats our usual strategies for dealing with dangerous environments. It presents a challenge that is not primarily physical or technological but psychological. The physical dangers can be described and quantified. The technological limitations can be acknowledged and to some extent addressed. But the psychological challenge, the challenge of maintaining constant, omnidirectional awareness in a hostile environment for an extended period, is one that human beings are not built to meet. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. We are exquisitely good at detecting threats that follow patterns, threats that come from predictable directions at predictable times in predictable forms. A predator that stalks along a known game trail, a storm that builds on the western horizon, a wave that breaks in a consistent pattern on a familiar beach. We learn the patterns and we use them to stay safe. But the snakes on Snake Island do not follow patterns that our brains can learn. They are everywhere, they are always, they look like everything else. Our pattern recognition machinery, the most sophisticated threat detection system in the natural world, fails in this environment because there is no pattern to recognize. The threat is not localized, it is not periodic, it is not visually distinct from its background. It is simply present uniformly, continuously, invisibly, and our brains, evolved for a world of patterned threats, cannot cope. This is why researchers describe the island as psychologically exhausting. It is not the fear that wears you down. Fear, at least the kind of acute fear that comes from a specific, identified threat, is manageable. It focuses the mind, it sharpens the senses. It triggers the fight or flight response and provides a burst of energy and alertness that can carry you through a dangerous moment. But the fear on Snake Island is not acute, it is chronic. It is the low-level, grinding, unrelenting awareness that something could happen at any moment from any direction and that you cannot see it coming. This kind of sustained, ambiguous threat is far more taxing than acute danger. It depletes the brain's resources, it erodes concentration. It produces a state of hypervigilance that paradoxically makes you less safe because a hypervigilant brain is also a tired brain, and a tired brain makes mistakes. This psychological dimension of the island's challenge is something that is rarely discussed in the popular media, which tends to focus on the physical danger, the venom, the fangs, the dramatic stories of bites and deaths. But it is, in many ways, the more important dimension. The physical danger can be quantified and, within limits, managed. The psychological danger cannot. It is inherent in the nature of the threat and in the nature of the human mind, and there is no technology, no training, no amount of preparation that can fully overcome it. And so the island remains, after 11,000 years of biological autonomy, essentially unexplored, not in the sense that no one has ever been there. People have been there. Scientists have walked its trails and handled its snakes and collected its specimens and published their findings. But in the deeper sense of knowing a place, of understanding its rhythms and its secrets, of being able to move through it with confidence and familiarity, the island remains unknown. It resists our knowing, it resists our presence. It is a place that exists on its own terms, according to its own logic, and that does not yield to the human desire to understand and control. Let us consider one more dimension of the island before we pause, and that is the dimension of time. Because the island operates on a timescale that is fundamentally different from the human timescale, and this difference is at the root of much of our difficulty in understanding it. Human beings think in terms of years, decades, at most centuries. We plan for the short term. We assess risks over timeframes that correspond to our own lifespans. We make decisions based on what we can see, what we can measure, what we can predict within the narrow window of our own experience. The island thinks in terms of millennia. The processes that shaped it, geological separation, faunal relaxation, evolutionary adaptation, operated over thousands of years, slowly, imperceptibly, without any single dramatic event that a human observer could point to and say, there, that is when it happened. The Golden Lancehead did not become a new species overnight. It did not develop its potent venom in a single generation. It did not adapt to arboreal hunting in a single lifetime. These changes accumulated gradually, generation after generation, each one so small as to be undetectable, each one building on the last, until after thousands of generations, the cumulative effect was a creature that was recognizably different from its ancestors, a creature that was something new. This is the tempo of evolution, and it is profoundly different from the tempo of human experience. We want things to happen quickly. We want results. We want to see change. The island has no interest in our schedule. It will continue to evolve, to change, to adjust at its own pace, regardless of whether we are watching, regardless of whether we approve, regardless of whether we even exist. And this is perhaps the most important thing the island has to teach us, not the specific details of its biology, although those are fascinating. Not the specific challenges of its exploration, although those are formidable. But the deeper lesson that the natural world operates on timescales and according to principles that transcend human experience, that some processes are too slow for us to see, too large for us to control, too complex for us to fully understand, and that our best response is not to try harder, not to push further, not to build better tools and make bolder plans, but to step back, to observe, to listen, and to accept that there are limits to what we can know and what we should attempt. The island does not need us, it has never needed us, and in its patient, venomous, 11,000-year silence it tells us something that we rarely want to hear. Some places are not for us, some systems are complete without our participation, some questions are not ours to answer, and that is not a defeat, that is wisdom. That is the beginning of a different kind of relationship with the natural world, one based not on dominion and control, but on respect and restraint, one that acknowledges the autonomy of other living systems and grants them the space to exist on their own terms. But we will continue to study the island. We will continue to visit briefly, carefully, with the humility that the island demands and the caution that it requires. We will continue to try to understand the Golden Lancehead, not because we need to, not because the snake needs us to, but because understanding is what we do. It is who we are. And the island, for all its resistance, for all its danger, for all its indifference to our presence, is one of the most extraordinary places on Earth, a place where the fundamental forces of life are laid bare, where the processes that have shaped every living thing on the planet are operating in a concentrated, invisible form, where the deep time of evolution is compressed into a space small enough to walk across in a single afternoon, if you could walk across it safely, which you cannot. And that, in the end, is the point. The island has spoken. 11,000 years of evolution is its argument. The Golden Lancehead, draped over a branch at eye level, motionless, invisible until the moment of the strike, is its punctuation. We will return to this island. We will go deeper into its mysteries. We will explore the technology that is being brought to bear on its secrets, the drones and remote sensors and genetic tools that are allowing us to study it from a safer distance. We will examine the philosophical questions it raises about the limits of human knowledge and the ethics of human intervention. We will consider its place in the broader context of island biogeography and conservation biology, and we will ask the question that the island has been asking us, silently, patiently, for 11,000 years. Are you listening? This concludes Part 1. Part 2 will continue the exploration of Snake Island, examining the technological approaches to studying this forbidden ecosystem, the philosophical implications of a place that operates beyond human control, and the profound questions it raises about our relationship with the natural world. We left the island in silence. We left it draped in the green dimness of its ancient forest, its canopy filtering the Atlantic light into something quiet and diffuse, its inhabitants going about the slow, patient business of survival that has occupied them for 11,000 years. We left the Golden Lancehead on its branch, motionless, waiting, perfect. We left the birds calling in the understory. We left the insects moving through the leaf litter. We left the whole extraordinary system ticking along, indifferent to our departure, indifferent to our fascination, indifferent to the fact that we cannot stop thinking about it. But we are back now. We always come back. That is the nature of this particular obsession, this particular relationship between human curiosity and a place that does not return the interest. The island does not wonder about us. It does not speculate about our intentions. It does not lie awake at night, if islands can be said to do anything at night, wondering why we keep sending boats across the water, why we keep strapping cameras to drones and sending them buzzing over the canopy, why we keep writing papers and making films and telling stories about a place that has existed in complete biological self-sufficiency since before the first cities were built, before the first alphabet was invented, before the first ship ever sailed these waters. The island does not wonder, but we do. And that wondering, that relentless, irrepressible human curiosity, is what drives us forward into deeper questions, into more complex territory, into the intersection of biology and philosophy and technology and ethics that the island represents. So let us go back. Let us go back to the island carefully, respectfully, with our eyes open and our hands at our sides. Let us see what else it has to teach us. The question of technology is where we need to begin this second part of our exploration. Because in the decades since the island was closed to the public, since the last lighthouse keeper departed and the automated light began its lonely vigil, since the scientific community acknowledged that sustained human presence on the island was neither safe nor advisable, technology has advanced in ways that offer new possibilities for studying environments that are hostile to human presence. The most obvious of these technologies is the drone. Unmanned aerial vehicles have transformed wildlife research in the past decade and a half. They can reach places that are inaccessible to human researchers. They can survey large areas quickly. They can carry cameras capable of capturing high-resolution images and video. They can be equipped with thermal sensors that detect the heat signatures of animals, even when those animals are hidden beneath dense vegetation. And they can do all of this without putting any human being at risk. For Snake Island, the drone is an obvious tool. The island's dense canopy, which is one of the primary obstacles to ground-level survey, becomes less of a problem when you're looking down from above. From altitude, the canopy appears as a continuous surface of leaves and branches, broken only by occasional gaps where a tree has fallen or a clearing has formed. The detailed structure of the forest is not visible, but the overall shape and extent of the vegetation can be mapped with precision. Researchers have used drones to produce detailed maps of the island's vegetation, identifying different forest types, mapping the distribution of canopy gaps and clearings, and tracking changes in the vegetation over time. This kind of large-scale mapping is essential for understanding the island's ecology because the distribution and structure of the vegetation determines the distribution of insects and birds, which in turn determines the distribution of snakes. A map of the vegetation is, indirectly, a map of the snake's habitat. But the limitations of drone technology become apparent quickly when you try to push beyond basic mapping. The dense canopy that covers most of the island is effectively opaque to optical cameras looking down from above. You can see the top of the canopy, but you cannot see through it. The snakes, which live in the interior of the forest, in the branches and on the ground beneath the canopy, are invisible to a drone flying above the treetops. Thermal sensors can detect heat signatures through sparse vegetation, but the tropical canopy of Ilha de Queimada Grande is not sparse. It is a multi-layered barrier that absorbs and scatters infrared radiation, making thermal imaging from above largely ineffective for detecting snakes or birds in the understory. This is the fundamental limitation of remote sensing in dense tropical forest environments. The data you can collect from above is real and valuable, but it is superficial. It tells you about the surface of the canopy, not about what is happening beneath it. And on Snake Island, most of the interesting biology happens beneath the canopy, in the dim, humid interior where the snakes hunt and the birds perch and the insects move through their complicated lives. Some researchers have attempted to get below the canopy by flying drones at low altitude, threading them between the trees and collecting images of the interior. This is technically challenging because the dense vegetation interferes with the drone's sensors and navigation systems, making it difficult to maintain stable flight in the confined space of the forest interior. GPS signals, which modern drones rely on for navigation and stabilization, are attenuated or blocked by the canopy, creating a situation where the drone is essentially flying blind, relying on its onboard sensors to avoid collisions with branches and trunks. The results of these interior flights have been mixed. In some areas where the canopy is high enough and the understory open enough, drones have successfully navigated below the canopy and collected useful images of the forest interior. But in the densest parts of the forest, where the vegetation is too thick for a drone to navigate safely, the technology reaches its limits. Drones have been lost to the vegetation, crashing into branches and becoming entangled in the undergrowth. And even when the flights succeed, the images collected are limited by the difficulty of lighting a dark forest interior with a small, lightweight camera system. Beyond drones, researchers have explored other remote sensing technologies. Acoustic monitoring, using arrays of microphones placed throughout the forest, can detect the calls of birds and other animals and provide data on their distribution and abundance without any need for human presence. The calls of different species can be identified by their spectral characteristics, and sophisticated software can now automatically classify and count calls from recordings, making it possible to survey bird populations across large areas without a single human observer setting foot in the forest. This technology is particularly useful on Snake Island for monitoring the bird populations that are the snake's primary food source. By deploying acoustic sensors throughout the forest and recording continuously over periods of days or weeks, researchers can track changes in bird activity over time, identifying periods of high bird abundance that may correspond to the arrival of migratory species, and correlating these periods with snake activity data collected by other means. The acoustic approach has one significant advantage over visual surveys on the island. It does not require human presence in the field after the sensors are deployed. The sensors can be installed during a brief, carefully managed visit and then left to collect data autonomously for weeks or months. The data is retrieved during a subsequent visit, again brief and carefully managed. In this way, the island can be monitored continuously without the risks and costs associated with sustained human presence. But acoustic monitoring has its own limitations. It works well for birds and for some other animals that communicate acoustically, but snakes are largely silent. They do not vocalize in ways that can be detected by microphones. Detecting snake presence and activity acoustically requires indirect methods, detecting the sounds that snakes make as they move through the vegetation or as they interact with their prey, sounds that are subtle, variable, and easily confused with the sounds of wind, rain, and other environmental noise. Direct acoustic detection of snakes on Snake Island is not currently a practical possibility. Genetic sampling offers another avenue for studying the island without sustained human presence. Environmental DNA, or eDNA, is genetic material that is shed by organisms into their environment in the form of skin cells, scales, feces, mucus, and other biological material. This genetic material can be collected from environmental samples, water, soil, leaf surfaces, and analyzed to identify which species are present and, with sufficient sampling, to estimate their abundance and genetic diversity. For Snake Island, eDNA sampling from soil and leaf litter could in principle provide data on snake distribution and population genetics without requiring researchers to directly handle any snakes. A researcher could collect soil samples from different locations across the island during a single brief visit, and then analyze those samples in a laboratory to determine where snakes are most abundant, which genetic variants are present in which locations, and how the population is structured spatially. This technology is still in its early stages of development for reptile monitoring in tropical environments, and there are significant technical challenges to overcome. The hot, humid conditions of a tropical forest cause rapid degradation of environmental DNA, reducing the reliability and sensitivity of eDNA-based surveys. The high diversity of organisms in a tropical environment means that the eDNA signal from any single species may be diluted and difficult to detect against the background of DNA from hundreds of other organisms. And the interpretation of eDNA data from complex environments is statistically challenging, requiring careful attention to sampling design and data analysis. Nevertheless, the technology is advancing rapidly, and it holds considerable promise for the study of Snake Island and other biologically sensitive environments where direct observation is difficult or dangerous. Camera traps, another standard tool of wildlife research, have also been deployed on the island with mixed success. Traditional camera traps, designed for ground-level photography of mammals and other large animals, are not well suited for detecting snakes, which are often small, cryptically colored, and slow-moving. However, more sophisticated multi-directional camera systems, deployed at multiple heights in the forest and using motion sensors tuned to detect small movements, have captured useful images of snakes in the field, providing data on their behavior, their hunting positions, and their use of different microhabitats. The challenge of deploying and retrieving camera traps on Snake Island is itself significant. The traps must be mounted on vegetation or on structures, which requires close approach and physical contact with the surrounding environment. Every step of the deployment process carries the risk of encountering a snake. The traps must be checked and maintained periodically, which requires additional visits. And the traps are subject to the same humid, corrosive conditions that degrade all equipment on the island, requiring frequent replacement of batteries, memory cards, and other components. Despite these challenges, camera trap data from the island has contributed to our understanding of the Golden Lancehead's behavior. Images have captured snakes in hunting positions, draped over branches with their heads lowered toward the forest floor or pointed outward toward open space where birds might land. Images have captured snakes in the process of consuming prey, the slow, deliberate process of swallowing a bird that may take several hours. And images have captured interactions between snakes, both the aggressive encounters that occur when two snakes meet in a territory dispute, and the subtler social dynamics of a population living at high density in a confined space. These behavioral data are fascinating, but they are also inevitably incomplete. A camera trap can only record what happens in its field of view, and the field of view is small relative to the total area of the island. The sample of behavior captured by any number of camera traps is a tiny fraction of the total behavior occurring on the island at any given time. Building a complete picture of snake behavior from camera trap data requires assembling hundreds or thousands of clips from different cameras at different times, and even then, the picture is fragmentary and potentially biased in ways that are difficult to fully account for. This limitation is not unique to Snake Island. It is a fundamental constraint of all wildlife research, the fact that we can never observe everything, that our data is always a sample, that our understanding is always incomplete. But on Snake Island, the incompleteness is more pronounced than usual because the conditions make sampling more difficult, more dangerous, and more logistically constrained than almost anywhere else. The island is a place where the gap between what we know and what we do not know is unusually large and unusually persistent. Let us consider the question of what we do not know. This is an important question and not just for Snake Island. In science, we tend to focus on what we know, on the results of research, the confirmed findings, the established theories. We celebrate the discoveries and tend to minimize the uncertainties, because certainty is what we are working toward, and uncertainty feels like failure, like a gap in our knowledge that needs to be filled. But uncertainty is not failure. Uncertainty is honesty. It is the acknowledgement that the world is more complex than our current models, that there are questions we have not yet learned to ask, that there are phenomena we have not yet learned to observe. And on Snake Island, the uncertainties are particularly instructive because they point to aspects of the island's biology that are genuinely mysterious, that resist our attempts to understand them, that suggest that the island has more to teach us than we have yet managed to learn. We do not know with precision how the Golden Lancehead regulates its body temperature. Like all reptiles, it is ectothermic, meaning it relies on external heat sources rather than metabolic heat generation to maintain its body temperature. On the mainland, lanceheads are often observed basking in sunny spots, absorbing solar radiation to raise their body temperature to the level needed for active hunting. On the island, the dense canopy limits the availability of direct sunlight in most of the forest interior, and large, open basking sites are rare. How the snakes manage their thermal needs in this low-light environment is not fully understood. We do not know the full extent of the snake's social behavior. Pit vipers are generally considered to be solitary animals, interacting with others of their species primarily for mating and occasionally for combat over territory. But on Snake Island, where the population density is so high, snakes must interact with each other far more frequently than they would in a typical mainland population. What happens during these interactions? Do the snakes have dominance hierarchies? Do they compete for the best hunting positions? Do they have any form of social memory, any ability to recognize individual conspecifics and adjust their behavior accordingly? These questions have not been systematically studied. We do not know how the snakes fare during the periods between migratory bird arrivals. The seasonal pulses of migratory prey are presumably the high points of the snake's nutritional year, times of abundance that allow the snakes to accumulate the energy reserves needed for reproduction. But what happens during the long months between these pulses? Are there sufficient resident birds to sustain the population? Do the snakes switch to other prey, insects, lizards, small mammals, if any remain on the island? Do they enter a state of reduced activity and energy expenditure that allows them to stretch their reserves through the lean season? We have partial answers to some of these questions, but not complete ones. We do not know the precise mechanisms by which the snake's venom chemistry has diverged from that of its mainland relatives. We know that the venom is more potent. We know some of the specific molecular changes that contribute to this increased potency. But the genetic pathways, the specific mutations and regulatory changes that underlie the evolution of venom composition are not fully characterized. Understanding these pathways would not only illuminate the snake's evolutionary history, but could also provide insights into the molecular mechanisms of venom action that would be relevant to drug development. And we do not know, perhaps most importantly, how stable the island ecosystem is in the long term. Has the golden lancehead population been at roughly its current size for thousands of years, or has it fluctuated dramatically, going through boom and bust cycles that we are too short-lived to observe directly? Are there density-dependent mechanisms, intraspecific competition, disease, starvation, that regulate the population size and prevent it from growing beyond the carrying capacity of the island? Or is the population size primarily determined by bottom-up forces, by the availability of prey, which is itself determined by the availability of insects and fruits, which is determined by the vegetation, which is determined by climate? These questions matter for conservation. If the population has been stable for thousands of years, it suggests a robust system that is likely to persist into the future, barring catastrophic disturbance. But if the population fluctuates widely, if there are years of great abundance and years of near starvation, then the conservation challenge is different. A population that can crash dramatically in bad years is more vulnerable to extinction than one that maintains a stable baseline, even if the average population size is the same. We do not have the long-term data to answer these questions definitively. The island has been studied for decades, but decades are a tiny fraction of the 11,000 years of the island's biological history. The data we have is a snapshot, a brief window into a process that has been running since before human civilization began. To understand the long-term dynamics of the system, we would need records extending back centuries or millennia, and such records do not exist. This is where paleontological methods come in. Fossilized remains, preserved bones and scales, and other biological materials can provide data on past population sizes and genetic composition that complements the snapshot provided by living populations. Some preliminary work has been done on subfossil remains from the island, fragments of bone and scale preserved in the soil that may be centuries or even millennia old. The analysis of these remains is technically challenging, because the hot, humid conditions of the island degrade organic material rapidly, and the probability of recovering interpretable genetic material from old specimens is low. But the work is worth attempting. Every piece of data about the island's past helps fill in the picture of its present. Every fragment of evidence about the system's long-term dynamics improves our ability to assess its vulnerability and its resilience. The island is not just a place in the present. It is a record of the past and a window into the future, and reading that record imperfectly, incompletely, but as carefully as we can, is one of the most important tasks that researchers on the island are undertaking. Now let us move away from the technical and the scientific for a moment and consider the philosophical. Because the island raises philosophical questions that go beyond the biology, questions about our relationship with the natural world, about the limits of human knowledge, about the ethics of conservation and intervention, that are worth exploring in their own right. The first of these questions is about knowledge. Specifically, it is about the limits of empirical knowledge in complex systems. We live in an age that places enormous faith in the power of science to understand the world. We believe that with sufficient data, sufficient computing power, sufficient analytical sophistication, we can understand any system, predict its behavior, and manage its future. We have achieved remarkable things with this approach. We have decoded the human genome. We have modeled the global climate. We have traced the evolutionary history of life on Earth back to its earliest origins. These are genuine achievements, and they speak to the real power of the scientific method. But the island pushes back against this confidence. It reminds us that there are systems whose complexity exceeds our current ability to understand them fully, not because we lack the tools, but because the system itself is fundamentally resistant to the kind of reductive analysis that characterizes modern science. The island is not a simple system. It is not a machine with a limited number of parts whose interactions can be fully specified. It is a living system embedded in evolutionary history, shaped by chance and contingency as well as by deterministic forces, operating on timescales that exceed human experience, and interacting with the wider world in ways that we can observe but not fully predict. The philosopher of science Karl Popper argued that scientific progress comes through falsification, through the formulation of bold hypotheses and the rigorous testing of those hypotheses against empirical data. But on the island, our hypotheses are constrained by the difficulty of collecting the data needed to test them. We can propose a hypothesis about snake behavior, but if testing that hypothesis requires sustained observation of snake behavior in the field, and sustained observation is not possible due to safety constraints, then the hypothesis remains provisional, a tentative idea rather than a tested theory. This does not mean that science on the island is impossible. It means that science on the island is difficult, and that the difficulty itself is scientifically significant. The island is a place where the usual methodological toolkit of biology reaches its limits, and understanding those limits is itself a contribution to knowledge. The second philosophical question raised by the island is about value. Specifically, it is about the question of what makes a species or an ecosystem valuable, and whether that value is intrinsic, something the species or ecosystem has in and of itself, or instrumental, something it has because of its usefulness to human beings. In conservation biology, there has been a long debate between these two perspectives. The instrumental view holds that nature is valuable insofar as it provides services to human beings: food, medicine, clean water, climate regulation, recreational opportunities, and so on. On this view, the golden lancehead is valuable because its venom contains compounds that could be developed into life-saving drugs. The island's ecosystem is valuable because it provides a research site for studying evolution and ecology. If the snake's venom turned out to have no pharmaceutical applications, if the island's ecosystem turned out to offer no insights that could not be obtained more easily elsewhere, then on the strict instrumental view, their value would be diminished. The intrinsic view holds that the golden lancehead and the island's ecosystem have value in and of themselves, independent of any use or benefit to human beings. The snake is valuable because it exists, because it is a product of evolutionary history, because it is a unique expression of the diversity of life on Earth. The island is valuable because it is a complete, self-sustaining biological system, because it represents the outcome of 11,000 years of evolutionary and ecological processes that cannot be replicated or replaced. On this view, the snake and the island would be equally valuable even if no human being ever benefited from their existence in any way. Most conservationists hold some version of both views, recognizing both the instrumental and intrinsic value of biodiversity, and using whichever argument is most persuasive in a given context. But the tension between the two views has real practical consequences. If we accept only the instrumental view, then our conservation efforts will be focused on species and ecosystems that are useful to us, and we will be less motivated to protect those that are not. If we accept the intrinsic view, we are committed to protecting all species and ecosystems, regardless of their usefulness, which is an enormous and potentially impossible undertaking given the scale of biodiversity on Earth. the island forces this question into sharp relief. The Golden Lancehead is arguably the most dangerous animal in the Western Hemisphere in terms of the threat it poses to any human who enters its habitat. It provides a dramatic illustration of the fact that nature is not always benign, not always friendly, not always aligned with human interests, and yet the case for its protection seems clear. It is a unique species, a product of evolutionary processes that have taken thousands of years, and its extinction would be an irreversible loss. This seems like a compelling argument even to those who have no interest in extracting pharmaceutical value from its venom. But why? Why does extinction feel like a loss? What exactly is lost when a species disappears? The practical losses are real but often uncertain: potential medicines, potential ecological services, potential contributions to biodiversity that we do not fully understand. The deeper loss is harder to articulate, but it is nonetheless real. It is the loss of a unique form of life, a unique perspective on existence, a unique expression of the possibilities that evolution has explored. Every species that goes extinct narrows the range of life on Earth, reduces the diversity of ways of being alive, closes off a branch of the evolutionary tree that will never grow again. This is the intrinsic argument for conservation, and it is in the end the most powerful one, not because it is the most practically compelling, but because it is the most honest. We protect species not primarily because they are useful to us, though they may be. We protect them because their existence is itself a value, because the diversity of life is something worth preserving for its own sake, because we recognize at some level that we are not the only measure of all things. The third philosophical question raised by the island is about limits. Specifically, it is about the question of what we should not do, what interventions are off limits, what forms of human involvement are inappropriate or harmful even when motivated by the best intentions. We have already touched on this in discussing the various proposals for managing the Golden Lancehead population, but the question goes deeper than conservation management. It goes to the heart of our relationship with the natural world and to the question of how we should respond to a place that explicitly resists our presence. There is a strong tradition in environmental ethics of advocating for the non-intervention approach, the idea that some wild places and wild systems should be left alone, protected from human interference, allowed to follow their own trajectory without human management or guidance. This tradition draws on a recognition that human intervention in natural systems, however well-intentioned, has a poor track record. We have introduced species that became invasive pests. We have suppressed fires that were ecologically essential. We have managed populations in ways that disrupted evolutionary processes and reduced genetic diversity. We have, in short, repeatedly demonstrated that our understanding of complex ecological systems is insufficient to support confident, large-scale management. For Snake Island, the non-intervention argument is particularly compelling. The system has functioned for 11,000 years without human management. Its internal dynamics, the relationship between the snake and its prey, the regulation of population size, the maintenance of genetic diversity within the constraints of a small island population, have been working out the details of their own accord, adapting and adjusting to changing conditions, finding their own equilibria. Our understanding of these dynamics is incomplete, and our interventions, even those designed to help, could easily cause harm that we did not anticipate and cannot undo. The non-intervention approach does not mean complete abandonment. It does not mean withdrawing all scientific attention or allowing poaching and destruction without response. It means limiting our involvement to observation and protection, to watching and learning rather than touching and managing. It means accepting that the island's ecosystem does not need us to optimize it, that our role is not to improve the system but to understand it, and that understanding is best achieved through patient observation rather than active manipulation. This is a difficult stance to maintain in a world that values action, that rewards results, that expects scientists and conservationists to do something, to intervene, to fix, to improve. The pressure to be active, to demonstrate that our presence and our attention are making a positive difference, is enormous. But sometimes the most responsible action is inaction. Sometimes the most helpful thing we can do for a system is to stay out of its way. The island has been making this argument for 11,000 years. It is time we started listening. Now let us talk about what the island means within the broader context of island biogeography, because understanding Snake Island in isolation, so to speak, gives an incomplete picture. The island is one of many islands along the Brazilian coast, and those islands collectively illustrate the principles of island biogeography that have shaped our understanding of biodiversity worldwide. Island biogeography is the scientific study of the distribution of species on islands and the processes that determine that distribution. It was formalized as a discipline in 1967 with the publication of a landmark book by the ecologists Robert MacArthur and Edward O. Wilson, titled simply The Theory of Island Biogeography. MacArthur and Wilson proposed a simple but powerful model that predicts the number of species on an island as a function of two variables: the size of the island and its distance from the mainland. The model is based on two opposing processes. The first is immigration, the arrival of new species on the island from the mainland, which tends to increase the number of species present. The second is extinction, the disappearance of species from the island, which tends to decrease the number. MacArthur and Wilson argued that these two processes reach an equilibrium, a balance point at which the rate of immigration equals the rate of extinction, and that this equilibrium determines the number of species present at any given time. Their model makes specific predictions. Larger islands should support more species than smaller ones because they have more habitat, larger populations, and lower extinction rates. Islands closer to the mainland should support more species than islands farther away because they are easier to reach, which means higher immigration rates. These predictions have been confirmed by decades of research on islands around the world, and the theory has become one of the foundational principles of ecology and conservation biology. Ilha de Queimada Grande fits beautifully into this framework. It is small, which means it supports fewer species than a larger island. It is far enough from the mainland that immigration is rare, which means that once a species goes extinct on the island, it is unlikely to be recolonized from the mainland. The faunal relaxation we described in Part 1, the loss of species from the newly isolated island over the centuries following its separation from the mainland, is precisely what MacArthur and Wilson's theory predicts. The island has settled at a new, lower equilibrium, appropriate to its size and distance from the mainland. What the theory did not fully anticipate, or rather what it provides a framework for understanding but does not itself explain, is the extraordinary evolutionary consequences of that relaxation. When the island lost its mammalian fauna and the snakes expanded to fill the vacated niches, the island underwent not just an ecological transformation but an evolutionary one. The snakes did not simply increase in number, they changed, they became something new. The island did not just lose species, it gained something, a new form of life that had not existed before, a species uniquely adapted to the specific conditions of this specific island. This evolutionary dimension of island life is something that MacArthur and Wilson's theory does not fully capture, because the theory is primarily about ecological dynamics, about the coming and going of species, rather than about evolutionary change within species. But it is the evolutionary dimension that makes islands like Ilha de Queimada Grande truly special, that elevates them from merely interesting examples of ecological theory to genuinely singular contributions to the history of life. Islands are evolutionary engines. This is a fact that has been recognized since Darwin first articulated it in the context of the Galapagos Islands, and it has been confirmed by research on islands all over the world. The isolation that islands impose on their inhabitants creates conditions that accelerate evolutionary change, that produce novel forms and behaviors and physiologies that would never arise in connected mainland populations. The Golden Lancehead is a product of this process, as are the giant tortoises of the Galapagos, the dwarf elephants of the Mediterranean islands, the flightless birds of New Zealand, and hundreds of other island species whose extraordinary characteristics owe everything to the isolation that shaped them. What all of these island species share, beyond their extraordinary characteristics, is vulnerability. Isolation that creates uniqueness also creates fragility. A species that has evolved in isolation, adapted to the specific conditions of a specific island, is not pre-adapted to the conditions anywhere else. It cannot simply move when its habitat is threatened. It cannot seek refuge in a neighboring population. It is where it is, and if where it is becomes uninhabitable, the species is gone. This is the conservation paradox of islands. The very isolation that makes island species so extraordinary, so scientifically valuable, so biologically unique, is also the source of their greatest vulnerability. And the forces that threaten island species, habitat destruction, invasive species, climate change, direct exploitation, are precisely the forces that human civilization has been generating at an accelerating rate for the past several centuries. The list of island species that have gone extinct in historical time is long and heartbreaking. Hundreds of bird species, dozens of reptile species, numerous mammals, plants, invertebrates, all gone, all irreplaceable, all lost forever because of human activity, deliberate or inadvertent. The passengers of these extinctions are not abstract statistics. They are evolutionary lineages that took millions of years to develop unique biological solutions to the challenges of survival that will never be seen again. The golden lancehead has not yet joined this list. It is still there on its island, in its forest, on its branches. But the margin of safety is not large. The population is small. The range is limited to a single island. The threats are real, and the history of island species extinction is not encouraging. What gives some reason for optimism is the combination of protection and research that has been directed at the island and its inhabitants. The access restrictions have reduced the direct threat of exploitation. The scientific research has increased our understanding of the snake's biology and the island's ecology, providing the knowledge base needed for effective conservation planning. And the growing awareness of the island's unique biological value has created a constituency for its protection that extends well beyond the small community of herpetologists who study it directly. But awareness and protection are not sufficient if the underlying threats are not addressed. The migratory birds that sustain the snake population need habitat not just on the island but throughout their range. The Atlantic forest from which many of these birds come and to which they return needs protection and restoration. The global processes driving climate change need to be slowed and eventually reversed. These are enormous challenges, far beyond the scope of any single conservation program focused on a single island. And yet, the island is a powerful symbol for exactly these larger challenges. It is a place where the consequences of our global environmental impact can be seen in concentrated, specific form. It is a place where the connection between what we do on the mainland, what we do to the forests and the climate in the ocean, and the fate of unique, irreplaceable species is visible and direct. It is a place that makes the abstract concrete, that translates the general problem of biodiversity loss into a specific story about a specific snake on a specific island. Stories matter, they always have. Human beings are narrative creatures, and we understand the world through stories. The story of the golden lancehead, the story of a snake that was made by 11,000 years of isolation into something extraordinary and is now at risk from the same forces that threaten biodiversity everywhere, is a powerful story. It has the specificity and the drama that the broader narrative of global biodiversity loss often lacks. It has characters: the snake, the island, the birds, the scientists, the lighthouse keeper. It has a setting that is vivid and strange and compelling. It has stakes that are real. If the story of Snake Island can make the broader story of biodiversity conservation more tangible, more immediate, more emotionally resonant, then the island's value extends beyond the purely biological. It becomes a catalyst for the kind of empathy and concern that drives conservation action, a reminder that the natural world is not an abstraction, but a collection of specific, extraordinary, irreplaceable things that deserve our attention and our care. Let us now turn our attention to one of the most intriguing aspects of the golden lancehead that we have not yet fully explored, its reproductive biology, because reproduction is, in evolutionary terms, the only thing that matters. All the adaptations we have discussed, the potent venom, the arboreal hunting behavior, the cryptic coloration, the prehensile tail, are all ultimately in service of one goal: to produce offspring that carry copies of the genes that underlie those adaptations into the next generation. The golden lancehead is ovoviviparous, meaning that the females do not lay eggs but retain them internally until the embryos are fully developed and ready to emerge as live young. This is the same reproductive strategy used by many other pit vipers, including the mainland lancehead relatives. Ovoviviparity has significant advantages in environments where the temperature is variable or unpredictable, because the female can thermoregulate her body temperature and thereby control the developmental temperature of her embryos, ensuring that development proceeds at the optimal rate regardless of ambient conditions. On the island, where the dense canopy limits the availability of warm, sunny spots for incubating eggs, ovoviviparity may be particularly advantageous. The female can move between warmer and cooler microhabitats to maintain optimal developmental temperatures for her developing young, something that would be impossible if she had laid eggs in a fixed location. The litter size in golden lanceheads ranges from 2 to 10 neonates, with an average of around 5 or 6. The neonates are born already venomous, a critical adaptation that allows them to begin hunting immediately. Newborn lanceheads are miniature versions of the adults, scaled down in size but fully equipped with the behavioral and physiological toolkit needed to survive on the island. They are capable of striking with accuracy, delivering a dose of venom that, while smaller in absolute terms than an adult's, is proportionally significant relative to the size of their prey. The reproductive cycle of the golden lancehead is strongly influenced by the seasonal availability of prey. Females are most likely to give birth during periods of high prey abundance, timing the arrival of their young to coincide with the periods when food is most available. The specific timing varies with the climate and with the unpredictable patterns of migratory bird arrival, but there appears to be a general tendency toward birth in the late spring or early summer of the Southern Hemisphere. Mating on the island is a complex process, complicated by the high population density and the scarcity of mates that meet the criteria for selection. Male lanceheads use chemical signals, pheromones deposited in the environment, to locate receptive females. When multiple males locate the same female simultaneously, combat may ensue, ritualized wrestling matches in which the males attempt to pin each other's heads to the ground. These combat bouts can be prolonged and energetically costly, but they rarely result in injury, as the combatants do not bite each other. Female lanceheads may mate with multiple males in a single season, and sperm competition, the process by which the sperm of different males compete to fertilize the female's eggs, may play a role in determining paternity. This kind of polyandry is not unusual in snakes and may have genetic benefits for the female's offspring, increasing genetic diversity in a situation where the overall population genetic diversity is already constrained by the small population size. The survival rate of neonate lanceheads on the island is not well documented, but it is almost certainly lower than that of adults. Young snakes are smaller, lighter, and more vulnerable to environmental stressors, and they must compete with the adult population for the same limited prey resource. The first few months of life are likely to be the most dangerous period for a golden lancehead, when the combination of inexperience, small body size, and limited venom supply creates the greatest vulnerability. Those that survive the juvenile period grow relatively quickly, reaching adult size within a few years. The lifespan of wild golden lanceheads is not precisely known, but based on comparison with related species and on the limited data from captive individuals, it is estimated to be in the range of 10 to 20 years under good conditions. If this estimate is correct, then a successful adult snake might reproduce 3 to 5 times over its lifetime, producing a total of 15 to 30 offspring, of which only a small fraction will survive to reproduce themselves. This kind of population arithmetic is essential for understanding the dynamics of small populations. If adult survival is high but juvenile survival is low, the population can sustain itself, but it is vulnerable to any factor that increases adult mortality, disease, starvation during a period of prey scarcity, or human poaching. If juvenile survival is also low, the population will decline, slowly at first, then more rapidly as the age structure shifts toward older individuals and the recruitment of new animals into the breeding population falls below the level needed to replace those that die. Monitoring these demographic parameters, the birth rate, the juvenile survival rate, the adult survival rate, the age structure of the population, is essential for assessing the health of the golden lancehead population and for predicting its future trajectory. But monitoring requires data, and collecting demographic data from a population of venomous snakes in a dense tropical forest that is closed to most visitors is extraordinarily difficult. This brings us back to the question of technology and its limits. The demographic data we need to fully understand the golden lancehead population are largely inaccessible through remote sensing. We cannot determine the age structure of a snake population from drone imagery. We cannot measure juvenile survival from acoustic monitoring data. We cannot assess reproductive rates from environmental DNA samples. These data require direct observation, or at minimum, direct sampling of individuals from the population. And direct interaction with the golden lancehead population is, as we have extensively discussed, extremely risky. This creates a genuine dilemma for conservation biology. The data needed to make informed conservation decisions about the golden lancehead are precisely the data that are most difficult and dangerous to collect. We are left in the position of trying to protect a species that we do not fully understand, with tools that cannot fully characterize its population status, in an environment that actively resists our attempts to study it. This dilemma is not unique to Snake Island, but it is unusually stark there. And it underscores a broader point about the limits of conservation biology as a science, that our ability to act on behalf of biodiversity often outstrips our understanding of the systems we are trying to protect, and that effective conservation requires not only good science but also good judgment in the face of uncertainty. Good judgment in the face of uncertainty is, arguably, the defining challenge of conservation biology in the modern era. We face thousands of species at risk, with limited resources, limited time, and limited knowledge. We must make decisions about where to focus our efforts, what interventions to attempt, what risks to accept, and what losses to acknowledge as inevitable, all without the complete information that would make these decisions straightforward. We must act, even when acting feels premature, because inaction in the face of imminent extinction is not a neutral choice. It is a choice to allow the loss to occur. But on Snake Island, the case for restraint and observation is unusually strong. The system is not currently in crisis. The Golden Lancehead population, while small and genetically constrained, is apparently stable. The island ecosystem, while vulnerable, is functioning. The threats are real but not immediate, and our potential to cause harm through well-intentioned intervention is significant. In this context, the appropriate response may be exactly what the island has been suggesting for 11,000 years. Watch, listen, learn, and do not touch. Let us now consider the island from a different angle, one that is rarely discussed in the scientific or conservation literature, but that is an important part of the island's cultural and psychological significance. Let us consider what the island means to us as a mirror, as a reflection of our own deepest instincts and fears. Human beings have a complicated relationship with dangerous animals. We fear them, which is rational. An animal that can kill you is a legitimate threat, and the emotional responses that evolved to help our ancestors avoid such threats are still operative in our brains, still generating the rapid pulse and heightened alertness that prepare us for fight or flight. But we are also fascinated by them, drawn to them, unable to look away. This combination of fear and fascination is one of the most powerful and consistent responses in human psychology, and it is on vivid display in our relationship with Snake Island. The island has become, in the popular imagination, a symbol of ultimate danger. It is cited in lists of the most dangerous places on Earth. It features prominently in documentaries and nature programs that are designed to elicit a specific kind of pleasurable terror in their audiences. It inspires a genre of internet content that combines factual information with visceral imagery and dramatic narration to produce a uniquely compelling form of fear entertainment. And yet, the island is not actually a place of horror. It is a place of extraordinary beauty, of ecological complexity, of evolutionary ingenuity. Golden Lancehead, for all its danger, is a remarkable animal. Elegant, efficient, perfectly adapted to its environment, a product of processes so ancient and so powerful that they dwarf anything human civilization has achieved. The island is not a nightmare, it is a marvel. The fear and the fascination are both appropriate responses, but the fascination is ultimately the more important one, because it is what drives us to understand, and understanding is what will determine the island's fate. The fear response in its more extreme forms can actually be counterproductive for conservation. If the island and its inhabitants are seen primarily as threats, as dangers to be avoided or eliminated, then the case for protecting them becomes harder to make. Snakes, in general, suffer from image problems in human culture. They are among the most feared animals on the planet, depicted as villains in mythology, religion, and popular culture across an enormous range of traditions. This cultural bias against snakes has real consequences for conservation, as snakes receive less conservation funding and public support than comparably threatened species of mammals or birds, which benefit from more positive cultural associations. Reframing the narrative around Snake Island, from a place of horror to a place of wonder, from a danger to be avoided to a mystery to be respected, is not just a matter of public relations. It is a conservation imperative. If we want to protect the Golden Lancehead, we need people to value it, and people can only value what they find meaningful. The snake's meaning, its significance, its claim on our attention and our resources is not based on its danger but on its uniqueness, its evolutionary history, its place in the web of life that extends from this tiny island out to the farthest reaches of the biosphere. Making that case, telling that story, communicating that significance is one of the most important tasks that scientists and communicators and filmmakers can undertake. It is not an easy task. It requires moving beyond the easy hook of danger and fear, beyond the sensational headlines and the dramatic narration, to something more nuanced, more patient, more honest. It requires asking the audience to feel not just fear but wonder, not just excitement but respect, not just the vicarious thrill of danger but the deeper satisfaction of understanding. This documentary is an attempt at that kind of storytelling, not perfect, not complete, but oriented toward the right questions, the questions about what the island is rather than merely how dangerous it is, about what it means rather than merely what it might do to you. Let us now revisit the concept of the island as a closed system, because this concept is central to everything we have discussed and deserves a more thorough exploration. A closed system in the thermodynamic sense is one that exchanges energy but not matter with its surroundings. A truly closed biological system, one that neither gains nor loses genetic material through migration, that neither imports nor exports species, is rare in nature. Even the most isolated islands receive occasional colonists, individuals or seeds carried by wind, ocean currents, or long-distance dispersal. And even the most isolated islands lose individuals occasionally, through death, through rare dispersal events, through the slow attrition of local extinction. But Ilha de Queimada Grande comes as close to a truly closed biological system as any place on Earth. The ocean surrounding it is wide and deep and cold, a barrier that effectively prevents the overland movement of terrestrial animals. The snake cannot swim across the ocean. The snake's mammalian prey are long gone from the island, and no new mammals have colonized from the mainland. The vegetation has been static for thousands of years, with the same species dominating the forest community that were present when the island was first isolated. The only significant exchange between the island and the outside world is through the birds, which cross the ocean freely, visiting the island on their migrations and returning to the mainland. These birds bring genes in the sense that they are part of a larger gene pool that extends throughout their migratory range. They bring nutrients, depositing their droppings on the island and importing the energy they acquired on the mainland. And they bring the possibility of ecological connections that link the island, however tenuously, to the broader Atlantic coastal ecosystem. But the birds do not change the fundamental character of the island as a closed system. They pass through, they feed and rest, they are consumed by the snakes, and they leave, carrying with them whatever they brought, returning to the mainland that the island has been separated from for 11,000 years. The closed nature of the island system has consequences for its long-term trajectory that are worth thinking about carefully. In an open system, where new individuals and new genetic material can arrive from outside, the long-term evolutionary and ecological trajectory is influenced by these external inputs. A population that experiences a disease outbreak can be replenished by immigrants from nearby populations. A species that loses genetic diversity through inbreeding can recover through gene flow from more diverse populations. An ecosystem that loses a species through local extinction can be recolonized if the species still exists elsewhere in the region. None of these recovery mechanisms are available on the island. If the Golden Lancehead population crashes, there is no nearby population that can replenish it. If the population loses genetic diversity, there is no source of new genes. If a disease sweeps through the population, eliminating a large fraction of individuals, the survivors are on their own, facing the recovery with whatever resources they have, nothing more. This is the fundamental vulnerability of the closed system. It is self-contained, yes. It is self-sustaining, yes, but it is also self-limited. Its ability to recover from disturbance, to adapt to novel challenges, to maintain its resilience in the face of change, is constrained by the resources it has at hand. And those resources, 11,000 years after the island's separation from the mainland, are smaller than they were at the beginning. The genetic diversity that existed in the founding population has been eroded by drift and inbreeding. The ecological community that existed at the time of separation has been simplified by the loss of species. The evolutionary options available to the Golden Lancehead, the range of possible responses to future challenges, are narrower than they were for the mainland lancehead from which it descended. The system has been running for a long time, and it has been running well, but it has been doing so by consuming a genetic and ecological capital that, once spent, cannot be easily restored. This is not a reason for despair. The island has maintained itself through enormous changes in the global environment over 11,000 years, and its track record of resilience is, on the whole, impressive. But it is a reason for humility, a reminder that the island's apparent stability is not the same as invulnerability, and that the factors we cannot see, the slow erosion of genetic diversity, the subtle shifts in the food web, the barely perceptible changes in climate and ocean conditions, may be moving the system toward a threshold that we will not recognize until it has been crossed. The work of understanding those hidden dynamics, of looking beneath the apparent stability to the underlying processes that sustain it, is the work of the scientists who study the island. It is painstaking, difficult, and often frustrating work. It produces results slowly, in small increments, through the accumulation of data points that individually seem trivial but collectively begin to sketch the outlines of the system's true nature. It is not the kind of work that produces dramatic revelations or simple answers. It is the kind of work that produces more questions, each one more specific and more precise than the last, as our understanding of the system deepens. This is science as it actually works, messy and incremental and uncertain, rather than science as it is often portrayed in popular media, as a series of dramatic discoveries and clean experimental results. The island is a reminder of the real texture of scientific inquiry, of the difficulty and the patience required to understand complex systems, of the gap between what we know and what we would like to know. Let us now consider the lighthouse one more time, because the lighthouse is more than just an infrastructure detail. It is a symbol, one of the most powerful symbols in the entire story of Snake Island. A lighthouse is, by design, a beacon. It is a human structure whose purpose is to make a dangerous place safer for navigation, to warn ships away from rocks, to guide travelers through darkness. It represents the human impulse to impose order on chaos, to make the dangerous manageable, to extend the reach of human safety into hostile environments. And on Snake Island, the lighthouse stands in the midst of a forest teeming with some of the most dangerous animals on the planet, maintaining its automated vigil, turning its light in the darkness, warning ships of the island's presence. But the lighthouse has not made the island safe. It has not tamed the forest. It has not reduced the snake population. It has not solved the problem of human vulnerability in this environment. It has simply acknowledged one specific danger, the rocks, and addressed it in one specific way, with a light. The rest of the island remains as it was. The forest is unchanged. The snakes are unchanged. The system continues to operate according to its own rules, indifferent to the light that turns overhead and to the human technology it represents. The lighthouse is a reminder of the limits of our power to impose ourselves on this place, a reminder that human ingenuity can address some problems and must acknowledge others. The lighthouse keepers who once lived in the shadow of that light understood something that we, from a safe distance, sometimes forget. They understood that courage and ingenuity are not sufficient to overcome every challenge. They understood that some environments make demands on human beings that human beings simply cannot meet. And they understood in the most immediate and visceral way possible that the island is not for us. The automation of the lighthouse was not a defeat. It was an honest assessment of reality. We cannot live here safely. We can shine a light. We can visit briefly, carefully, with full awareness of the risks, but we cannot make this place our own, and we should not try. Now let us talk about what comes next, not just for the island, but for our relationship with it. The future of scientific research on Ilha de Queimada Grande will almost certainly involve a gradual increase in the use of remote and autonomous technologies, and a corresponding decrease in the amount of time that human researchers spend on the island. This trajectory is already visible in the current research landscape, where each successive expedition to the island is more carefully planned, more tightly scoped, and more reliant on technology than the last. The development of improved environmental DNA sampling techniques will make it possible to characterize the genetic composition of the snake population without capturing and handling individual snakes. Advanced acoustic monitoring systems will provide continuous data on bird activity throughout the island, allowing researchers to track the prey base without any human presence in the field. Miniaturized GPS transmitters and biologgers attached to individual snakes during brief handling sessions will provide data on snake movement and habitat use that would be impossible to collect through direct observation. Satellite imagery and LiDAR, a remote sensing technology that uses laser pulses to map the three-dimensional structure of vegetation, will provide increasingly detailed maps of the island's habitat, allowing researchers to track changes in the forest over time and to model the distribution of suitable snake habitat under different scenarios of climate change and vegetation change. These technological advances will not replace human presence entirely. Some research questions will still require direct observation and direct sampling, and the researchers who do that work will continue to do it with the same extraordinary caution that characterizes current expeditions. But the proportion of island research that requires direct human presence will decrease, and the safety of those who do visit will improve as better protective equipment and better medical protocols are developed. The long-term goal of island research is not just to understand the Golden Lancehead better, though that is important. It is to understand the island as a system, to characterize the web of ecological and evolutionary relationships that sustain it, and to identify the specific vulnerabilities that could lead to its collapse. With that understanding in hand, it will be possible to develop a genuinely evidence-based conservation plan, one that addresses the real threats rather than the imagined ones, and that intervenes, if intervention is necessary, in ways that are targeted, proportional, and minimally disruptive to the system's inherent dynamics. The island deserves this kind of careful, respectful attention. Not the attention of tourists seeking a thrill, not the attention of collectors seeking a trophy, not the attention of filmmakers seeking a dramatic backdrop, but the sustained, patient attention of scientists and conservationists who understand what is there, why it matters, and what is at risk. And now, as we draw toward the conclusion of this exploration, let us return to the fundamental questions that the island raises, not to answer them definitively, because they cannot be definitively answered, but to sit with them, to feel their weight, to acknowledge their importance. The island exists. For 11,000 years it has existed, independent, self-sustaining, evolving, producing forms of life that would not exist without it. It asks nothing of us. It needs nothing from us. Its continued existence does not depend on our awareness or our concern or our conservation efforts, at least not in the short term. It will continue to exist whether we pay attention to it or not, and yet we cannot help paying attention. We cannot help sending boats across the water and scientists into the forest and drones over the canopy. We cannot help writing papers and making films and telling stories. We cannot help being fascinated, alarmed, humbled. We cannot help wanting to understand. This wanting to understand is perhaps the most distinctively human thing about us. Other animals are curious, other animals explore, but none of them, as far as we know, ask the kind of questions about the world that we ask. None of them study ecosystems and evolutionary processes and population genetics. None of them make documentaries about islands. The compulsion to understand, to know, to explain is ours alone. And it is, when directed with wisdom and humility, a beautiful thing. It has given us medicine and agriculture and engineering and art and all the other things that make human civilization what it is. But it has also given us the hubris to believe that understanding means control, that knowing means owning, that explaining means dominating. And it is this hubris that the island corrects, quietly, persistently, with its venomous, patient silence. You can know about this place, the island says. You can study it, you can observe it from a distance with your drones and your sensors and your eDNA samplers. You can even visit briefly, carefully, with due respect for what you are walking into. But you cannot own it, you cannot control it, you cannot make it yours. It belongs to itself, to its 11,000 years of history, to its snakes and its birds and its insects and its ancient trees. It belongs to the evolutionary process that made it and to the geological process that shaped it. It belongs to the deep time of Earth's history, which preceded us by billions of years and will outlast us by billions more. We are visitors here. We are always visitors on this island and on this planet. The deep time of evolution, the vast sweep of geological history, the immensity of the biological diversity that surrounds us, these are not ours. We have inherited them briefly, and we have a responsibility to the inheritance, not to squander it, not to consume it, not to reshape it in our own image, but to tend it, to understand it, to protect it, and ultimately to step aside and allow it to continue on its own terms. The island has been doing this for 11,000 years. It does not need our permission, but it could use our restraint, and so let us end where we began, with the water. With the Atlantic Ocean, which separated this hilltop from the mainland and set in motion everything we have described. With the rising sea that made an island of a ridge and made an evolutionary experiment of an accident. With the water that surrounds the island on all sides, that reflects the light of the automated lighthouse at night, that brings the migratory birds in their seasons and the scientists in their boats, and the swell that makes landing difficult and the current that makes the crossing uncertain. The water does not care about the island any more than the island cares about us. The water simply moves as it has always moved, following the physics of planetary rotation and atmospheric circulation and the gravitational pull of the moon. And as it moves, it shapes the world, island by island, coastline by coastline, drop by drop. It shaped this island. It will continue to shape it. And when, in the very long run of things, the sea level rises enough to reclaim the island, when the forest is swallowed and the rocks are submerged and the Golden Lancehead has nowhere left to go, the water will continue moving, as indifferent then as it is now. But that is the very long run. In the shorter run, the run we can actually influence, the island is still there. The snake is still there. The forest is still there. The birds still come. The system still works. And we still have the opportunity, if we choose to exercise it, to ensure that it continues to work, to protect it from the specific threats that our civilization poses, to give it the space and the time it needs to continue its 11,000-year experiment in isolation and evolution. This is not a small opportunity. It is, in the context of the biodiversity crisis that defines our era, a significant one. Each species we protect is a thread in a fabric that we do not fully understand. Each ecosystem we allow to function is a system running processes that we may need, or may simply want, or may someday learn to appreciate in ways we cannot currently imagine. And each place we leave alone, each place we resist the urge to colonize and exploit and manage, each place we simply watch from a respectful distance, is a place where the autonomous creativity of the natural world continues to operate. The island is one of those places. Perhaps the most dramatic, certainly one of the most compelling. A place where the creative power of isolation and natural selection has produced something that exists nowhere else on Earth. A place that resists us not out of malice but out of its own nature, its own evolutionary integrity, its own 11,000-year momentum. A place that, if we leave it alone, will continue to evolve, to change, to produce new forms and new behaviors and new compounds and new wonders, long after everyone watching this has gone. Leave it alone, watch it from a distance. Support the science that studies it carefully and respectfully. Protect the forests and the ocean that sustain its migrating birds. Keep the poachers away and the tourists away and the well-intentioned managers away. And let the island be what it has always been, what it was before we arrived and what it will be long after we are gone. A closed system, a self-sustaining experiment, an evolutionary engine, a place that does not want us, and a place that, precisely because it does not want us, is more important than almost any place that does. The Golden Lancehead is still there, draped over its branch, motionless, patient, perfect. Waiting for the next bird, the next meal, the next generation, the next 1,000 years. It has been waiting longer than civilization has existed, and it will keep waiting as long as we give it the chance. Give it the chance. That is all it asks. That is all the island asks. Not attention, not admiration, not our management or our medicine or our intervention. Just space, just time. Just the simple, profound, radical act of leaving well enough alone. The island will do the rest. It always has. This concludes the full documentary narration for Snake Island, the place that doesn't want you. Part 1 explored the geological origins, evolutionary biology, and ecological structure of Ilha de Queimada Grande and its remarkable Golden Lancehead Viper. Part 2 continued with an examination of technological approaches to studying the island, the philosophical questions it raises, the broader context of island biogeography, and the enduring lessons the island offers about the limits of human knowledge and the importance of biological autonomy. Together, these two parts constitute a complete exploration of one of the most extraordinary and least understood places on Earth.